Chapter 17:14. Dan E stood up and bowed. He didn't have the patience to waste words with the other party, so he went straight to the point. We can make peace with your esteemed side, but you must agree to a few of our conditions. Bai Wei said, "Please speak, Exalted One." He still didn't know Dan Yi's name, nor did he know where he came from. But he didn't ask anything when he saw the other's cold expression. Dan Yi said, "First, you must hand over all of the Tao treasures and treasures you've collected over the years. You are not allowed to stay in Busa Heaven. In addition, you must remove all of the formations and secret arrangements you've set up here." Bai Wei's expression didn't change when he heard this. He knew that they were making peace, but in fact, it was equivalent to them admitting defeat. If they continued to fight, he would be the only one left alive. However, Tai's intervention had caused the other party to have scruples, so they wouldn't be polite to them. They might even want him to refuse. Therefore, even if the conditions were harsh, as long as they weren't pushed to the limit, it was acceptable. After discussing with Lu Li for a while, he said, "You can hand over the items, including the 7 Tao treasures obtained from Busu Tian, to the Yuan Venerates. The array formation can also be removed, but we must have a place to stay in Busu Tian." He was very clear that the primordial sea of the void was the main target of those extraterrestrial beings. If he was driven out of the primordial sea of the void, he would be at the forefront. Without a Taoist instrument, how could he compete with them? Moreover, all the treasures used to build doctrine artifacts and the Zhou Huanyuan jade came from Buxa Heaven. If they left this place, they wouldn't have a chance to turn the tables. As for doctrine artifacts, as long as the Tai golden bead was on their side, it wouldn't matter if they took them out. Instead, it would make the other party feel more at ease. The golden-robed Taoist also said, "Yuan Zun, don't you think this condition is too much? If so, how can Bai Wei's disciples compete with you for the primordial jade?" If it was something else, he could turn a blind eye to it. But Zhou Huanyuan jade was related to his fundamental interests, so he couldn't flinch. Dan Yi glanced at him, then discussed with the others and said coldly, "So the land of Busha Heaven belongs to our people Path. You can't stay here, you need to find another place to stay, and from now on, you are not allowed to enter any of our people Path's land." When Bai Wei heard this, he was silent for a while. Even though this request was harsh, he could at least stay and not have to go to the void primal sea. Fortunately, Busu Heaven was vast and boundless, and there were many places where people were rarely seen. At worst, he could just retreat a little further away. Thus, he said, "All right." Dan E continued, "The second condition is that you are not allowed to recruit disciples from Busu Tian." Bai Wei frowned and thought about it. If Busu Tian couldn't recruit disciples, then he could only go to the Void Essence Sea. And it could be foreseen that there would be many extraterrestrial beings in the Void Essence Sea. This would force them to compete with this generation, and for this reason, they had to ensure that the living beings in the outside world did not disappear. However, he had enlightened many sky demons before, so he understood that these things also had a certain growth potential. Even though they were different species, even if they couldn't become his trusted disciples, they could still be cultivated as disciples. On the other hand, recruiting disciples from Busu Heaven would be under the eyes of the people Path, and their every move would be seen clearly. Thus, after thinking about it, he said, "I can also agree to this condition." Michihito Ichido's spirit transmitted, "This person agreed to this so easily, does he have other plans?" Fu Qingming said, "No matter what plans he has, as long as we take all the things that are beneficial to this generation, what else can he do?" Danny said, "That's right." He retreated from the spirit and said to Bai Wei, "Thirdly, everyone has to fight against the extraterrestrial demonic beings with me, and you have to make an oath that if the demonic disaster is not eliminated, the innate spirits will not be able to achieve upper arts, and will not be able to return to their roots." Bai Wei's expression didn't change, but his heart sank. If he agreed to this condition, then before the sky demon was eliminated, not only would all the paths of the innate spirits be blocked, but he would also not be able to bring Qian Luo and Dai Gong back. He thought it over and said, "Forgive me for not being able to agree to this. Everything in this world has a chance to attain the Tao. Even if it's just a Khanate spirit, the karma here isn't something I can handle. How about this? If I slay a great demon, I will obtain a position. Would the Yuan venerates agree? Dan Yi's side discussed for a while, and this condition was not unacceptable. Once the other party agreed to it, they would have to fight to the death with the extraterrestrial demonic beings in order to strengthen their forces. If they didn't do it, then they would only be able to protect the two of them. In terms of numbers, they would never be able to surpass the people of humanity. Thus, he nodded and said, I can agree to this. Seeing that the demons had agreed to all three conditions, he changed his mind and used his spirit to transmit. Do you have any other suggestions? I can take this opportunity to raise them all at once. Michihito Ichido thought about it and said, just now, why don't you order them to give up on the upper arts? Danny thought about it and said, what does fellow Taoist Zhang think? Zhang Yan smiled and said, I think there is no need to do this. In order to achieve great success, the universe needs to be reversed. These people rule the world. Now that our people's humanity has not perished, the righteous laws still exist. Therefore, they are only an external path, so there is no need to pay attention to them. Michihito Ichido heard this and nodded. It was indeed so. As long as the people's humanity did not perish, then the upper arts would still be external and not the righteous path. But if the people's humanity died, then there was no point in caring about all this. After another discussion, Dan Yi withdrew from the spirit and said, now that we have not returned to Bushutian, there are still some things that cannot be determined. Today, we will talk about these three things first, and the rest will be discussed in the future. These were only the main conditions. Apart from these, there were still many details to be discussed. However, Bushutian's situation was unclear, and only they had entered. Just now, they could only put it aside for now. Bai Wei also understood that such an important matter could not be settled with just a few words. Also, the matter of how to fight with Zhou Huanyu and Jade had to be discussed separately. However, he only needed to take a breather, and it would be fine. After all, they had stopped fighting. He raised his hand and was about to leave, but Fu Qingming stopped him and said, please hand over the Dao tool in your hand first. Bai Wei stopped and turned around to say, High Holiness Fu, we are fighting against the extraterrestrial demon. Is it inappropriate to hand it over now? Fu Qingming looked at him and said, since we are fighting against the extraterrestrial demon together, there will not be two of you supporting it alone. I don't think there is anything inappropriate about this. Bai Wei thought about it. Currently, the Dao tool was actually of little use to the extraterrestrial demon. Since they had already discussed the conditions, there was no harm in handing it over. Therefore, he sent a message to Lu Li. When Lu Li heard this, his heart sank and he said, Heavenly Lord Guangxing, if we agree to these conditions, we will indeed be weakened to the extreme. Especially if we hand over the Dao tool, how can we compete with the human Dao? Since Taoist Tai is here, why don't we try to fight for it? Bai Wei shook his head and said, Taoist Tai knows that we are using him, so how can he be sincere? If we give up the Dao tool, he will be more at ease. Because in this way, he will be certain that we cannot leave him. Lu Li thought about it and was still confused. He said, but without these, I will lose a lot of confidence in the fight for the Origin Jade. Does he not care that we will lose? Bai Wei said calmly, the fight for the Origin Jade is not only about strength and cultivation. It also depends on fate and fate. Tai has already seen through this. Just now, he does not care about this. Lu Li was still brooding. He said, even so, it is still too much. Bai Wei said, the human Dao's Yuan Zun is so overbearing. He wants me to be unable to hold back and refuse. At that time, Taoist Tai might not be on my side. He might even force me to agree. Instead of that, I might as well just accept it. Lu Li said with hatred, does Tai not know that he cannot achieve his wish even if he leaves us? Bai Wei said coldly, if he leaves us, he can still go to the extraterrestrial demon. By then, he might be able to achieve his goal. We are not his only choice. Lu Li's heart skipped a beat. Bai Wei said again, Heavenly Lord Guangxing, you must know that we have an endless lifespan. Why fight for a moment of pride? Think back to when we were hiding under the human Dao. Didn't we endure it all the same? As long as we can protect ourselves, we might have a chance in the future. Lu Li sighed. With a wave of his sleeve, he tossed out all the Tao artifacts in his hands. Bai Wei, on the other hand, directed with his mind. 5 rays of spiritual light moved through the void and landed in front of the victorious heavenly ship. He said, "All the Tao artifacts in our hands are here. Everyone Yuan Zun, please keep them." Danny took a look. Among the 7 Tao artifacts, the primordial imperial seal and the spirit world Rui had landed on their side. The 5 Tao artifacts in the field were the pure yin-yang seal, the heaven and earth upside-down gourd, the Lu Yuan golden bell, the mysterious beginning painting, and the imperial universe yellow sky mirror. He glanced over and confirmed that there were no mistakes. He nodded and said, "You may leave first. We will attack later and deal with the extraterrestrial demon together." When Bai Wei saw this, he didn't say anything more. He turned around and disappeared. The golden-robed Taoist raised his hand and said, "If that's the case, I will take my leave." When he finished, he disappeared without a trace. Dan Yi waved his hand and took the 5 Tao artifacts. Today's discussion had yielded more than he had imagined. Because Bai Wei could use the pure yin-yang seal to escape in times of danger, he could even take all these Tao artifacts with him. Therefore, if they had chosen to fight to the death, they would not have been able to obtain these Tao artifacts. Now, they could force the demon to fight the extraterrestrial demon. This greatly alleviated the pressure on them. He sighed and said, "Looks like we can only fight with this person after we deal with those demons." Michihito Ichito also said, "After we return to Busha Heaven, we can gather precious materials and refine the Tao artifact. The Tai golden bead may not be the only one in the world. We can slowly find a way to deal with it." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. The battle now was not like before. Just as Tai had said, the true Yang had an endless lifespan. The battle between the two would not last for a day or night. It was normal for it to last for tens of thousands of years. The demon side also understood that although they had temporarily put down the battle because of the extraterrestrial demon, it did not mean that the karma of the past would not exist. The accumulated conflicts between the two sides would not be resolved because of this. This peace talk was actually a truce halfway. One side was to accumulate strength, the other side was to recover. But sooner or later, there would be a winner and a loser. Chapter 17:15. Dan Yi waved his sleeves and placed the 5 Tao artifacts in front of everyone. He said, "I have to deal with the extraterrestrial demon now. Since these Tao artifacts are in my hands, they cannot be taken by the demons. It's not appropriate to leave them with me. It's best to divide them and keep them." As he said this, he pointed at the yin-yang pure seal and said, "Among all the treasures, this one is the most powerful and has the most mana. I think it should be given to fellow Taoist Zhang to keep." Fu Qingming agreed, "This is appropriate. This item is called a seal, but in reality, it's a sword. Fellow Taoist Zhang is good at killing with flying swords. It's most appropriate for him to keep it." Dan Yi agreed. Seeing that Michito Ichito had no objections, he pointed at the treasure and it turned into a ray of spiritual light and flew away. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, waved his mind, and the item broke through the void and landed in front of him. He took it and examined it for a moment. Seeing that the aura on it had been erased, he waved his sleeve and kept it. In reality, even if these Tao artifacts were in their hands now, they wouldn't be able to unleash much of their power. They still needed to be refined again. However, taking them away would weaken the demon's power. If they still had the Tai golden bead, they would be fish on the chopping board. Dan Yi reached out and took the portrait of mysterious beginning. He sighed. "Just now in the battle, this item can be said to be crucial to the demons. Lu Li relied on this item to survive your defeat under fellow Taoist Zhang's secret skills. He fought again and again. This item can't kill, but it's the same as having many lives. Who do you think is suitable to give this to?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I won't take this item. Something like the portrait of mysterious beginning might be able to entrust one's life to it, but he didn't trust it. Moreover, if his life were to start over, would it still be him? That might not be the case. Therefore, he didn't take this item." Fu Qingming said, "I have the body of a Tao god. If my foundation is broken, it's useless. If it's not broken, I won't be afraid of external disasters. If it's in my hands, it'll be casting pearls before swine. Michito Ichito also waved his hand and said, "These treasures are all made by human path cultivators. I might not be able to use them in my hands. Especially this portrait of mysterious beginning, it needs to sign in the foundation of one's chi activity. I'm not at ease. However, that imperial yellow heaven mirror is a bit interesting. If you don't have any objections, why don't you let me take care of it?" Danny thought about it. Since the three of them were not willing to take the treasure, then he could only leave it with him. He put the item away, then raised his hand and sent the imperial yellow heaven mirror to Michito Ichito. He turned and said, "The remaining two treasures, Lu Yuan's golden bell and Qian Kun inverted gourd, are both powerful weapons. Fellow Taoist Fu, fellow Taoist Yi, why don't you take one each? It'll be good to intimidate the external enemies." As for who the external enemies were, it was self-evident. It was the extraterrestrial demons now, but in the long run, it was still the Khanate demons. Apart from that, there was also the Tai golden bead. Fu Qingming pondered for a moment and said that Qiankuan topsy-turvy gourd has the ability to randomly shift space. It can harm enemies and also protect people. I have quite a number of disciples under me, so it'll be of use to me. If everyone is at ease, just hand it over to me. Michito Ichito was indifferent. He said, "If that's the case, then I'll take care of the Lu Yuan's golden bell." Danny smiled and waved his sleeve, sending the two treasures to the two of them. He then said to Michito Ichito, "Fellow Taoist Yi, this is not for safekeeping but to refine it well. It'll be of great use in the future." Michito Ichito took it and laughed. "Since it's in my hands, I won't bury it." Fu Qingming said, "It's just that these Dao weapons are not refined by me after all. Even if I occupy Bu Su Tian and collect precious materials to refine more suitable items, it won't be done in a short time. Before that, I still have to rely on these few treasures." Zhang Yan saw that the 5 treasures had their respective places, so he also moved the void and sent the spirit Rui scepter and the imperial seal of Xian Yuan to the 3 of them. He said, "These 2 treasures were also obtained by the demons from the people of Dao. Today, we can also decide their ownership." He already had the truth-linking steel and the glazed lotus cup. Now that he had the pure yin-yang seal, he didn't have the mood to refine too many of them. Moreover, he still needed to refine his own treasures in the future, so he couldn't care less about these. It was useless to keep them in his hands. Fu Qingming smiled and said, "We all have offensive treasures in our hands, only fellow Taoist Dan Yi doesn't have any. Why don't we let him handle them?" Michito Ichito also smiled and said, "That makes sense." Dan Yi shook his head. He couldn't refine so many treasures on his own, not to mention that he had the innate golden lotus in his possession. Compared to these Dao treasures, he felt that the innate golden lotus was more fundamental. However, after thinking about it, he still rolled up his sleeves and stored them away. He said, "Then I'll leave these 2 treasures with me for now. If any fellow Taoist needs them, you can come and take them from me." Zhang Yan then said, "When I was fighting with the demons and monsters, I found that the 4 treasures used by this generation all had incantations to connect with each other. As such, we don't have to worry about others taking them away. The 4 of us should also work together to develop an incantation just in case. In this way, if there are any changes in the future, and the treasures are lost outside, others can take them back at any time." Dan Yi nodded and said, "This matter should be taken to heart. But all these matters can be discussed after the demons and monsters remove the heavenly void formation. Now that the treasures have temporary owners, we should discuss how to deal with the extraterrestrial demon." Michito Ichito asked, "Sage Zhang, do you know how we should deal with this kind of thing?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and then said, "The barrier of heaven and earth has just been opened. Now that this tide is coming, the extraterrestrial demon can't be killed completely. Only when this tide is over will we have a chance to force it back. As long as the demonic creature has lost its host, it will be much easier to deal with it. However, after this matter, it will definitely disperse in all directions. Although it is difficult to stop it, if we ignore it, the living beings in the heavens will suffer because of it. So we need to think of a way to suppress it. The extraterrestrial demon was now hosted on that unknown thing, and it itself was in the constant cycle of life and death. Therefore, it was impossible to kill it in such a situation. The only thing we can do is to attract it. Michito Ichido said, "It seems that this thing is not afraid of the formation and can move the void at will. How should we control it?" Zhang Yan said, "We can first use supernatural power to suppress it. At the same time, we can send incarnations to the heavens and lead this thing to the desolate place. This way, the living beings in the heavens will not be too affected." Dan Yi thought for a while and said, "Incarnations can deal with ordinary demonic creatures, but how should we deal with the great demon's consciousness?" Zhang Yan said, "Although the two worlds are merging and the universe is changing, the barrier between heaven and earth has just been broken. Therefore, the change is not big. However, when the main and reverse worlds are stabilized, the original host will no longer exist. If it does not return and wants to stay in this world, it will have to change. Therefore, as long as we can hold on for a few decades, these demonic creatures will not be as difficult to deal with as they are now." Michito Ichido said, "But I have a question. Now that these demonic creatures are staring at Bai Wei and Lu Li, if I go forward, is it possible that they will turn their attention to us?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Demonic creatures are neither good nor evil. They have no thoughts, only their instincts. Anything that can threaten them, they will try to get rid of it. This is the reason why they targeted those few demons at the beginning. Now that we have the upper hand, we are a bigger threat to them. However, they have been fighting with the innate demons for a long time. Before the outcome is decided, or before there is a huge change, they will not give up on their current opponents. Therefore, you don't have to worry that they will turn around and attack us." When Danny heard this, he was slightly relieved and said, "If that is the case, then we will make our move now. Do not stop the extraterrestrial demon here." After the four of them discussed, they used their vitality and mana to create a world in an instant and tried to lure the demonic creatures in. Those demon masters could enter and leave the world at will, but ordinary demonic creatures could not. The reason why they could move freely was because the demon masters dragged them along. Previously, Bai Wei and the others could not stop them because both sides had roughly the same number of people. At the same time, they had to be wary of human path cultivators. However, it was different now. Once Zhang Yan and the others arrived, their strength was already above the demons and they could forcefully suppress them here. They did not allow them to escape to other places. When they moved here, Bai Wei and the other two naturally felt it. Bai Wei thought for a moment and said, "Since human path Yuan Zun is making a move, that demonic creature should be able to stop him. Jiguan Tianzuan, I can enlighten more demonic creatures. According to the agreement, Bu Su Heaven cannot take in disciples, so this junior can be my disciple." Lu Li said, "What should we do with those tribes in Li Heng world? Should we take them in as well? This junior's foundation is already strong, and he has too much post-celestial chi. It will be difficult for him to achieve anything in the future. I'm afraid he will not be able to compete with human path sections." Bai Wei thought for a moment and said, "We can take in those little demons for now. After all, our strength will be within the void primordial sea in the future. Since I cannot rule the world, to cultivate the fundamental scripture, we need to spread the teachings in the heavens. If all living beings in the world read and cultivate it, then we can also establish another sect outside of the current righteous method. After this junior is enlightened by me, he can spread the teachings everywhere for me. There is no need to abandon him." Lu Li said, just as Guangxing Tianzuan said. The 6 true young great venerables put aside their differences and worked together. The momentum of the demon tide was immediately stopped. In the blink of an eye, another 30 years passed. Zhang Yan could feel that the momentum of the demon tide was gradually receding. After a while, he should be able to step into the 7th transformation realm. He had thought before, what would happen if he could not reach the 7th transformation? Would the few demon masters stop changing if they could not learn from him? But after thinking about it, he felt that it would not be so. If this person couldn't find any reference from him, then he would naturally imitate other things, or simply walk his own path. At the end of the day, He was originally at the level of true yang. He could make all things beneficial to himself, and he didn't need to deliberately adapt to the world. Although doing so would take more detours than before, the general trend wouldn't change, and there might even be some inexplicable variables that would appear. Thinking of this, his consciousness turned. The body of strength path stood in the void, waiting for the time to come to take this step. Chapter 1716. After another 3 years, the 6 of them could feel that the momentum of the crowd of demons was not as strong as before. It was obvious that after experiencing the initial violent outburst, it was gradually calming down. However, since the barrier between the 2 spaces had been broken, the momentum could not be stopped in the future. However, this was only from a monstrous tide to a turbulent river, but for the mighty true yang, the pressure had been reduced a lot. The 3-headed demon master felt that the unknown object that he could attach himself to was getting less and less. Even though it was not completely cut off, he could not defeat his opponent if this went on. Therefore, he succumbed to his instincts and stopped entangling himself. Instead, he retreated into the reverse of heaven and earth. Dan E and the others immediately felt the intention to retreat. They all became spirited and tried to suppress it with their skills, trying to see if they could make it stay and suppress it. However, they found that it was of no use. It was only a bit of restraint. Seeing that it was useless, they communicated with each other. Since they could not kill these demons, and it seemed that they were not going to other places in the primordial sea of void, then there was no need to force them to stay. Therefore, they withdrew their skills and dharma powers. Without the external force, in an instant, the 3-headed demon master broke away from this world and returned to the reverse of heaven and earth. Dan E followed the direction they were heading in and looked towards the barrier. However, he could only see that the barrier was filled with endless darkness. It was difficult to tell what was going on inside, but there was a faint omen of danger. He had a feeling that there weren't only 3 of these great devils. Perhaps there were even more behind them. He thought for a moment before he looked up. He looked across the void to where Bai Wei and Lu Li were and said, "You too, today we are forced to stop you. Just now, but it is not certain that we will not come back in the future. I hope you two will be more careful in the future." Bai Wei said slowly, "Since we have made a promise, we will go back with you on Zune to deal with this generation." With that said, he looked at Dan E and the others, saluted, and then transferred his mystic energy and left with Lu Li. The 2 of them were far away from where they were just now. After searching for a long time in the primordial sea of the void, they came to a deserted world. Here, they moved their primordial chi slightly, and in the blink of an eye, they changed the place into a world full of spiritual opportunity. They knew that in the future, Busu's actions in the heaven would be watched by human path cultivators. It would be very inconvenient, so they planned to focus on the void primordial sea. This world sky was prepared to be used in the future. Lu Li waved his sleeve and let out the extraterrestrial demons that were purified. There used to be a large number of them, but after the battle, there were only about 300 left. When they saw the 2 standing on the hill, they all lowered their heads and bowed with respect. They saluted together and said, "Greetings, primordial lords." Lu Li said, "From now on, all of you will be my attendants. Today, I will bestow upon all of you the 72 little incantations so that you can transmit my message and spread my teachings." As soon as Lu Li said this, the 300 people felt that they were enlightened. All kinds of wonderful skills surged out from the bottom of their hearts. Unconsciously, they opened their mouths and recited the incantations. Lu Li lowered his head and began to recite the fundamental Mahayana Sutra as well. At first, there were clouds gathering, and there was a brilliant golden light shining down. But not long after, there were all kinds of auspicious signs. For a moment, rainbow light crossed the sea, the sky was overflowing with colorful clouds, golden flowers floated in the sky, and sweet springs gushed out from the ground. Several days and nights later, the void primordial sea was thoroughly cleansed by the incantations. The sun, moon, stars, earth, fire, wind, water, everything revolved according to this incantation. All kinds of things, rising and falling without reason, all came out from this incantation. Lu Li looked at the sky and said, "From now on, this place will be the shoulder of that Miao Kong, the back of the scripture." This part of the world was cleansed by the fundamental Mahayana Sutra. From now on, even if an ordinary person came here, as long as he was devout and sincere, he would be able to recite the incantation. Every move he made would have unimaginable power. They did this not without reason. They did not destroy the human path. Therefore, the transmission of the world today was still the method of the human path. Compared to the fundamental Mahayana Sutra, the only advantage was that the threshold was not high. In the beginning, everyone could enter this door, but it was difficult to cultivate to the depth. Only by guiding people to this kind of place could they go one step further. Bai Wei said, "This fundamental Mahayana Sutra alone is not enough. From now on, we need to expand the boundaries. The arrival of those beings from the outer space can be regarded as an opportunity. All living beings in the world must have wonderful skills to protect themselves. This is beneficial for us to preach." Lu Li said, "If that is the case, the Yuan Zun of the human path will not sit by and watch. He will certainly make trouble." Bai Wei said, "Then we will have to rely on our own means. Rather than fighting enemies in the primordial sea of the void, you must give me some convenience." He glanced down and said, "Now that this is settled, Heavenly Lord Jiguan can follow me back to Busu Tian first. According to our agreement, we will first remove the formation there. We can also take this opportunity to collect some external items for future use." Lu Li said with pity, "It is such a pity that I have to hand over all the treasures I have collected in the past 1,000,000 years. It is all for naught." Bai Wei said, "In the future, when we are in Busha Heaven, we can continue to collect. If I want to establish a sect, I must have suitable Taoist artifacts." Lu Li thought of something and sent a message to him, "How is Tai?" Bai Wei replied, "That day, I called him out with the incantation. I have already planted karma. He has returned to his precious embryo to sleep. He will not come out unless I call him. But if there is nothing else, we will not provoke him." He knew that he could not leave Bai Wei now that he had lost all his Taoist artifacts. But in the future, it would be hard to say. Lu Li said, "According to our previous agreement, even if I can get the Zhou Huanyuan jade, I will have to give it to him. I don't know when our sect will be able to prosper." Bai Wei smiled, "We have an endless life. As long as we can protect ourselves, we will have a chance. Celestial Master Jiguan, wasn't it the same with the change in Busha Heaven?" Lu Li nodded. However, even though they hadn't landed outside of Busha Heaven like the human Dao Yuan venerates, it was still difficult for them to figure out exactly what had happened. Therefore, while they rejoiced, they also felt a tinge of fear. On the other side of the void, after the extraterrestrial demons retreated, Zhang Yan knew that the time had come. He first ordered his incarnation to clean up the scattered demons. Then he bid farewell to Dan Yi and the others. With a turn of his consciousness, he returned to the body of strength. At this moment, he had accumulated enough unknown things in his body. As long as he did not deliberately suppress them, he could naturally enter the 7th stage. He looked around. The 3 demon masters had already returned to the anti-world. However, there seemed to be some kind of change in their aura. He knew that if he did not move, they would change on their own and adapt to the void. Thus, he didn't delay any longer and instantly released all the restraints on him. Instantly, everything seemed as if they'd suddenly converged together, and at this instant, only the purest bit of divine insight remained. Yet along with this divine insight unfolding, everything suddenly opened up once more and were reborn once more, and it seemed as if everything had returned to its original state. But after all, there were some things that were different. Where the barrier of heaven and earth originally was, a figure that lay across the heavens and earth suddenly opened his eyes. Within his eyes, there were billions of reflections of the void rotating, and then they flashed and disappeared. Zhang Yan spread out his hands and looked. He felt the ceaseless surging Weili in his body. He knew that he had already stepped into the 7th stage of divine will. In the future, when he fought against his enemies, he would have another thing to rely on. His gaze looked down and instantly swept across the front and back of the world. He chanted, Clear the darkness of the universe and see the divine space. Only then do I know that the two worlds are from the same source. Strength shakes the universe and breaks the wall of the sky. Finally, from the first origin path to greatness. When the path of strength reached this level, it was different from the path of qi. Where a true yang cultivator was, everything was beneficial to him. This was actually considered mild because everything was moving subtly. The living beings themselves were unable to detect it and took it for granted. However, the body of strength was even more tyrannical and violent. Wherever he was, even the order of heaven and earth seemed to be changed. Everything was forcefully reversed and went in the direction that was most beneficial to him. Looking at this situation, even the supernatural power from the outside would be eliminated imperceptibly. If there was a saying, it would be pure to the extreme and only you. He did not need to observe to know that at this moment, no matter where he stood, even if he was not in front of the barrier of heaven and earth, he could break through the barrier at any time and let the unknown thing continuously gather on his body. Even if external force destroyed him, he could be reborn. If the true yang was placed in the primordial sea, then he was the same as those demonic creatures. He was placed in those unknown things. However, it was useless even if his original body was found. As long as the unknown thing existed in the world, he could be reborn continuously. And the supernatural power of this body was actually not limited to these. After the heaven and earth of the two worlds gradually merged, he felt as if he could go to a place that the body of Qi path could not easily reach. Thus, with a change of his mind, in an instant, everything stopped and the void became quiet. He looked over and saw that everything was like a stagnant portrait. It seemed as if there was no past or future. Moreover, as long as he was willing, it seemed as if he could continue to exist here until the end of the world. He thought for a while and waved his sleeve at a void. On the surface, there did not seem to be any changes. However, he could feel something and so he withdrew from it. However, he realized that the void had already disappeared from the void's primordial sea. It seemed as if it had skipped all the processes and directly obtained the result. In other words, no matter what action he did in the supernatural power, it would explode when he withdrew. This kind of action seemed to be able to erase everything in the world and return to silence. However, just now, he clearly felt a slight resistance, which meant that this action consumed his primordial essence and could not be performed at will. However, if used well, it could still be considered a powerful killing move. However, he also understood that this kind of method might be able to deal with people of the same generation, but it was still not enough against a primordial treasure like the Tai Golden Pearl. Perhaps if he raised the true yang method to the third level and combined his strength, he would have a chance to subdue it just now. As he was thinking, he suddenly felt something and turned to look. Because he had reached the seventh level, most of the unknown things had been swallowed and blocked the barrier between the two worlds. This was like holding up another red continent. The extraterrestrial demons naturally would not allow it, and they tried to break through the barrier again. In an instant, the raging demon tide rose again, all of them rushing towards him. Chapter 1717. Zhang Yan took a deep breath as he watched the demonic beings charging towards him. In an instant, everything began to twist. The indescribable beings surged out from the surroundings and were continuously pulled into his body. In an instant, countless heavenly demons were returned to the void under this whaley. Only the three consciousnesses could not be eliminated. What followed was the surging pressure, but he ignored it. He clenched his fist and smashed it towards the void. In that instant, everything seemed to shatter. The three consciousnesses suddenly disappeared, but not long after, they reappeared. He could feel that his punch just now had actually killed them all. However, the consciousness of the demon master was truly indescribable. Even if they were scattered by him, they would be reborn from the reverse of heaven and earth. On the other hand, true sun-level cultivators were able to move without any hindrance, and they could go to anything in the world at any time, so it seemed like they had never disappeared. Moreover, because of their endless life and death, it didn't matter to them whether they were killed or not, and the ordinary limits of life and death could no longer be applied to them. Zhang Yan also understood this logic. Once these demonic beings had their eyes on him, they would not easily retreat. Only by continuously defeating them and causing their bodies to change in the process could they stop this trend. The three demon masters' consciousnesses failed time and time again in their attacks. They were repeatedly destroyed by the reverse of heaven and earth. If it was still when the barrier of two spaces was broken just now, they would continue to wear each other down without any change until the opponent could no longer endure it. However, as the reverse of heaven and earth converged, it also slowly changed. Originally, it was formed by countless demonic beings that had been reincarnated in the cycle of life and death. At this moment, it gradually formed its true self through the grinding and resistance. It was no longer the previous self. As this consciousness was born, it quickly expanded and spread, gradually overriding all the other demonic beings. It stabilized itself, assimilated all the demons, and was easily replaced. This was only a small difference, but it allowed the three consciousnesses to distinguish that as long as they could not stay in the void primordial sea for a long time, they would not be able to pose a threat to their opponent. After realizing this, they finally began to change. And this change had been directed at Zhang Yan from the very beginning. Naturally, what was being examined here was not his external appearance, but his form of being in the world. This was because external appearance was only for showing to others, but in reality, it was for himself. His current body of strength path could not only accept indescribable things, but he could also stay in the void primordial sea for a long time without relying on it. This was equivalent to opening up a successful path for the great demons. This was also the easiest thing for them to do. Zhang Yan sensed that the three great demons were becoming more and more self-aware, so he did not continue to attack. Instead, he stopped and waited for them to transform. The reason for this was because if he were to leave or attack, these demonic creatures would definitely attack him again. Although he wasn't afraid, since he couldn't kill them at all and would instead endlessly prolong the process, there was no need for him to do such unnecessary things. All he had to do was watch from the side. As the indescribable things surged in, and at the same time, spiritual essence from the various worlds filled in, the bodies of the three great demons gradually formed. Another 10 years later, three beings with great divinity appeared in the void. They were 2 men and 1 woman. The men had a jade hairpin in their hair and wore a Taoist robe. Their sleeves fluttered in the wind, while the woman had dark eyes and jet black hair. Her skin was like jade porcelain. The demonic beings did not have the idea of yin and yang, but after they were formed, their consciousness swept through the various worlds and naturally knew all of this. Zhang Yan glanced at them. Because they studied him, they also had a body of strength path. However, his body of strength path was acquired, but it was formed in one step. What he used was originally his own Weili. It looked similar, but the essence was different. Especially now that he could still accumulate his origin and increase his cultivation. If this person could not find a superior Tao method, then his ability would not increase in the future. At this moment, a thought flashed in his mind, and he suddenly used his divinity to observe the three great demons. In an instant, in his eyes, everything fell into stillness again. These heavenly demons also remained motionless, but in his senses, they were not in the same place as him. It was as if his body was in another space. He could see them, but he could not touch them. At this moment, the three demon masters also seemed to have sensed something. Their figures gradually became blurry, as if they were about to disappear. Zhang Yan was not surprised by this. Before, he had tried to observe other great true yang cultivators with this method, and it was the same. This was because both sides were at the same level and had long surpassed the world. Even if this method fell on them, it could at most cut off some of their foundation and could not kill them in one go. However, this divinity could be used repeatedly, and the only thing it consumed was his own origin. If they really fought, even if it was difficult to kill them, he could still suppress them. At this moment, among the three great demons, a handsome man with hair that reached his heels stood out. He raised his hand and bowed, saying, "Demon Master Qizhou greets you." Zhang Yan had broken Qi Lu and reached the 7th layer of strength path. His body was also attached to an indescribable thing, so he naturally left a mark in the reverse of heaven and earth. Outsiders would not be able to know this, but demon masters who were also outside could use this mark to confirm each other's identities. Qizhou was his name among the demons. This meant that he had replaced Qi Lu and became the barrier between the two worlds. Wherever he was, the barrier would be there. If he did not close the door, then the demons would not be able to enter the real world. However, on the other hand, this also protected the reverse of heaven and earth from being contaminated by the real world. At this moment, Zhang Yan felt something in his heart. He also saw the marks left by the three people in the reverse of heaven and earth, and immediately knew their names. They were Qi Yao, Qi Su, and Heng Jing. At this moment, the one who came out to speak first was Qi Yao. However, just now he had incarnated into the real world, so he had not received a title yet. Thus, he bowed and said, "Three demon masters greet you." Actually, both sides were attached to an indescribable thing, so there was no need for words to communicate with each other. It could be said that they could communicate telepathically. It was just that these demon masters had just now, and in order to show that they were different from before, they spoke with their mouths. Qi Yao said, "It was thanks to Demon Lord Qizhou's hand that we were able to break through the barrier between realms. Only then were we able to enter the world and reveal ourselves. Now that we've obtained such good fortune, you should accept our respect." As he said that, the three of them bowed again. Zhang Yan said indifferently, "This is a small matter. Heaven and earth need to unite, and all things will eventually be complete. Even without me, you can still enter the real world." In his heart, he knew that although these three people seemed to be polite and courteous to him, it was only on the surface. As long as the sky demon saw someone who was weaker than him, but still had a hidden threat, he would not hesitate to make a move. At this moment, he did not do anything to him because he knew that he could not kill him, so he would not do such a useless thing. However, on the other hand, if they had mastered a secret technique that could suppress him, then their attitude would be different. Qi Yao said sincerely, "Demon Master Qizhou is being modest. Without you as a witness, I might not have been able to obtain this body so smoothly. We are indebted to you for this, and we will remember it. In the future, we will repay you." After saying this, he raised his hand again, and the three of them disappeared without a trace in a flash. Looking at the place where the three people disappeared, Zhang Yan could not help but ponder. The enemies that the people of the human Tao would face were these people first, then the Tai Golden Pearl and the innate demon. The primordial sea of void would obviously become a place where the two sides would fight, and there would not be a single place that could be safe. When the demonic formation at Bu Shutian's place was removed, it would be time to consider moving the cultivators of the 9 continents there to settle down. After the 3 great demons escaped, they also opened up a place to temporarily settle down, and continuously called in the scattered demons from the outside. Heng Jing said, "Qi Yao, Demon Master Qizhou does not seem to be of the same mind as me. Why are you so respectful to him just now?" Qi Yao said with a smile, "Demon Master Qizhou broke the barrier between the two worlds, and we used him as a reference to obtain this body. This can also be considered as sowing karma, so what's the harm in showing him some respect? Moreover, this is the first demon master in the world, and he achieved Tao before me. His divine power is vast, and his power is unfathomable. Even though he does not share the same mind as me, he is after all from the same source. Now that I have entered the world, there might be a time when I need to rely on him." At this point, he saw that the two of them were deep in thought, so he continued, "We were originally separated by the Red Continent, and were muddle-headed, and did not know the Tao of Heaven. Therefore, when the two worlds merged, a few of our peers were worn down by the power of calamity. Even though we have this body now, it is not guaranteed that we will be safe. We still need to find the right path to transcend the outside world." The three of them recalled the scene at that time, and they were also sad. The power of calamity came and went without a reason, and it was the will of heaven that did not fall on them. However, if they had the protection of Tao, even if they encountered it again in the future, they might be able to avoid it. But even without this tribulation, it was not that there was no threat from the outside world. For example, the 6 Yuan Zun who obstructed them were not weaker than them, and even though they might not be able to kill them, they had the means to suppress them. How should we find it? Qiyao asked. Qiyao thought about it carefully and said, the world is divided into two, the void primordial sea and Busu heaven. Busu heaven is the ancestral continent of the world, where the scriptures are. To obtain the Tao, we have to conquer this place. However, the 6 Yuan Zun are all interested in this place, and if we go there now, we will definitely have a conflict with them, and it will be difficult to win. Our destination should be in the void primordial sea, and we will first occupy this place, recruit disciples, establish a sect, and then fight with the demons and humans, and then try to occupy Busu heaven. Both Qi Su and Heng Jing thought about it, and they also thought that this was the most appropriate move. They were above the past and the future, and as long as they wanted to, they could see everything that had happened in the past. However, they could not clearly see the things that involved the almighties of the same generation, but it was not difficult for them to understand the general trend. Heng Jing said, after all, we came from the outside world, and if we want to establish a foothold in the world, the almighties here will definitely not allow it. Now that the 6 of them are working together to control me, I'm afraid it will be difficult for them to do so. Qiyao smiled. Let's not fight with them first, this is a bad plan. Why don't we talk to them, and if it goes well, we might not even need to fight, and we will be able to occupy a piece of land to live in. Chapter 17-18. After Bai Wei and Bai Xian defined Miaokong, they successively opened up several great heavens and moved many demon tribes from the Liheng world to this place. They were also ordered to cast spells and cultivate. However, because this generation's foundation was already solid and their spiritual wisdom was insufficient, they could only be the servants and followers of the heavenly devil sect from now on. After they were done, they were about to return to Busu Tian when they sensed something. Lu Li's expression changed slightly. He said, Guangxing Tianzuan, those few extraterrestrial beings seem to have undergone some changes. Bai Wei sensed for a while and said in a low voice, the 3 Qis are very different from before. He took out a spell and calculated. After a while, he said, if I am not wrong, this generation should have reconstructed his Dharmakaya in exchange for a long-term stay in the present world. Lu Li heard this and felt something was wrong. He frowned and said, wherever the sky demon passes, the spiritual vigor will be extinguished and the heaven and earth will be dark. If it can stay in the world for a long time, the void's primordial sea and the 10,000 worlds will not be safe. This is not beneficial for me to come down here. Whether it was the cultivation of the human Tao or the upper Mahayana Sutra they opened, if they wanted to cultivate and enter the Tao, they would need to rely on spiritual vigor. However, once the sky demon came, it would definitely attract that unknown thing. Wherever it passed, the sky would be dark, the stars would be destroyed, and spiritual vigor would not exist. This was not something they could tolerate. Even without the agreement with the human Tao, they would not allow this to happen. Bai Wei shook his head and said, that may not be the case. The demonic beings we came into contact with previously were neither good nor evil, nor did they have any desires or thoughts. If we encounter them, we can only kill them. If it incarnates into the world, it must have a true self. Then we can communicate with it and convince it with reason. If it does not take the initiative to invade the void, I can stay put for the time being. Lu Li thought for a while and said, if that is the case, should we try to make contact with it? Bai Wei said, there is no need for that. If it wants to, it will come to us. Moreover, those few human Dao Yuan Zun will be more anxious than me. At this point, his voice became slightly heavy. Regardless of whether it is a battle or an alliance, we have to accept it. Don't forget, Heavenly Lord Jiguan. According to the agreement, in order to bring Heavenly Lord Miao Xing and Heavenly Lord Cheng'an back, we have to kill the great demon. Since he has appeared in the world, there is a possibility of killing him. The 2 of them had originally planned to go to Busu Tian to remove the formations and prohibitions that they had set up. However, the extraterrestrial demons' movements were afraid that after they left, the newly opened Miaokong would be invaded. Therefore, they patiently made a series of arrangements. At the same time, they recited a large spell to protect themselves. In this way, they could slightly hinder the extraterrestrial demon. As long as there was any unusual movement, they would immediately notice it and rush back in time. After Qi Yao and the other demons left, Zhang Yan felt that there would be many things in the void primordial sea in the future. Therefore, after some consideration, he decided to set up some chess pieces here. Previously, when he was fighting against the demons, he used the 9 worlds as a formation, but it was destroyed by the Tai golden bead. It could be said that nothing existed. However, it existed in his divine will and he could observe it at any time. There were countless living beings in it. Although they had returned to the void, they were created by his divine will. At this moment, he only needed to visualize them again and they could be born again, returning to their original appearance. This generation had a karma connection with him, so it was suitable to guard here. Thinking of this, he decided to shine it into the world. Not long after, the 9 worlds were born one by one. Then, a Dharmakaya descended and gathered all the living beings who had been instructed in the Tao. He told them that there was a demon wreaking havoc in the outside world and that they should be careful and protect it. If they had the strength to spare, they could go out and wipe out the demons to ensure the peace of the heavens. After doing all this, he turned his consciousness and landed on the victorious heavenly ship. At this moment, Dan Yi and the others had clearly noticed the changes of the demons. As they were discussing, they saw him arrive and stood up to welcome him. After greeting him, Dan Yi asked, "Do you know why the demons have changed, fellow Taoist Zhang?" Zhang Yan said straightforwardly, "This is because the extraterrestrial demons have taken human form and entered the world. They are no longer the formless and intangible things they used to be." When the 3 of them heard this, their expressions became solemn. Although the demons were formless and hard to kill, their actions could be predicted. In other words, the threat was laid out in the open. As long as they were prepared, they could actually avoid it in advance. However, if they had intelligence, it would be difficult to deal with them, because it was impossible to know what they would do next and what kind of harm they would cause. Dan Yi frowned and said, "The changes of these extraterrestrial beings clearly mean that they want to stay in the world for a long time. The way they cultivate is completely different from me. No matter where they land, it will be a tribulation for the living beings of the world." Fu Qingming said solemnly, "Wherever they go, all space will be tainted. We definitely can't allow them to roam around like this." In order to stop the extraterrestrial demons, the 4 of them had worked together to create a world. However, after the extraterrestrial demons left, they noticed that the world had been tainted by a strange aura. It was incompatible with the clear and turbid qi and was extremely difficult to get rid of. Even if they dispersed the world, it would be difficult to get rid of it completely. They could only leave their incarnations there to wear down and refine it. This was something that even true yang cultivators like them found difficult to deal with. If the extraterrestrial demons were to turn the entire world into such a state, then there would definitely be no place for living beings to live. Dan Yi said firmly, "We can't allow them to stay outside for too long. Even if we can't chase them back, we have to find a way to trap them in a certain place." Fu Qingming said, "I agree with fellow Taoist Dan. They are currently in the void primordial sea, but what if they go to Bu Su Tian? If even Bu Su Tian is tainted like this, then where would there be living beings in the world? We have to suppress them now." Dan Yi turned around and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, what do you think?" Zhang Yan thought for a while. He knew that the people of human Tao were afraid that the extraterrestrial demons would appear in the world, and Qi Yao and the other demon masters also didn't want to see them find him again. Therefore, they definitely wouldn't act unscrupulously. However, this couldn't be ignored. If they saw that no one came to restrain them, they would definitely gradually let go of their hands and feet. At that time, it would be a disaster. Therefore, he said, "I think that we need to restrain these demons. We can't let them go." Dan Yi nodded and said, "That is indeed the case. However, we need to find them first." Michihito Ichido said, "Leave this matter to me." With a flip of his wrist, he withdrew the Imperial Universe Yellow Heaven Mirror. He'd been constantly refining this treasure in the last 10 years. Even though he was unable to bring forth the full might of this treasure, so long as his enemies didn't intentionally conceal their auras, then it wouldn't be difficult to find them. After holding the mirror for a long time, he turned his gaze and stared at a certain place. He said, "Found them." Almost at the same time, the four suddenly disappeared from where they were. The next moment, they appeared in front of Qi Yao and the others. Bai Wei and Fu Qingming also appeared with them. According to their previous agreement, whenever there was a fight against the extraterrestrial demons, they had to contribute. Therefore, after being informed of this matter, they also rushed out. Qi Yao and the other two had a sign before the crowd arrived, but they didn't deliberately avoid it because of this. Because their original goal was to find these powerful people in the modern world and have a good talk. Qi Yao looked at the 6 Yuan Zun standing in the void and smiled faintly. He bowed and said, "Friends, I greet you." He didn't recognize Zhang Yan because the latter's Dharma body and Strength Path body were not only different in appearance, but even their aura was fundamentally different. Therefore, in his eyes, they were two completely different people. Dan Yi saw that Qin Wenyan was completely different from before and could communicate with him. Thus, he didn't immediately attack Qin Wenyan. After a brief discussion, he asked, "You are all beings from the outer realms. Why did you come to our world?" Qi Yao replied, "To search for the great Tao, to understand the wonders." He spoke with great sincerity because that was indeed what he thought. Dan Yi frowned and looked at him for a while before saying, "But we can't let you wander around the heavens and pollute our world." Qi Yao nodded and said, "I know that if this matter isn't resolved, I'm afraid a battle is inevitable. In fact, even if you don't come looking for us, we will come looking for you." He paused for a while and said, "Why don't we make an agreement? We promise that we will only wander within this world. If we don't leave this place, you can't come and interfere. Is that okay?" Danny thought for a while and said with his divine will, "What do you think, friends?" Fu Qingming said, "Since we can't drive these demons away, this is the only way." Michihito Ichido said, "They must have a plan. But we don't have the power to kill these demons from the outer realm now. We can slowly find a way. When we have a plan, it won't be too late to kill them." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He knew that the heavenly demons from the outer realm were inexplicable. Unless they were suppressed, they would not die no matter how they were killed, just like his body of strength. The only thing that could be of use here was a Dao tool. Among all the treasures, only the Yin-Yang Pure Seal could do something like this. However, he had just obtained this treasure and had not begun to refine it, so he could not unleash its power. As for giving it to Bai Wei to use, that was impossible, because when the item was in his hands, the qi activity that he had planted in it had already been erased. Even if he took it back, it would be impossible for him to use it. Moreover, even if this treasure could be used without hindrance, it could only suppress one demon master. It could not take care of all 3 demon masters at once. Instead, it might force the remaining people to act recklessly. And if the heavenly demons could be stabilized first, they would have enough time to collect the treasures, refine the suppressing treasure, or deduce the sealing supernatural power. Therefore, he said, "I think that we can agree. This way, we can temporarily protect the heavens." After this discussion, Dan Yi said, "We can agree to this, but the place where you are stationed must not be a place where there are living beings." Qi Yao smiled and agreed. Then, he cupped his fists and the 3 of them disappeared into thin air. Seeing this, Bai Wei and Fu Qingming said goodbye and turned to leave. Dan Yi's expression did not relax at all. He said with his divine will, "There are demons inside and heavenly demons outside. We should enter Bu Su Tian as soon as possible so that we can find a way to deal with them." Chapter 1719. Establishing the Serene Sky Evolution Technique. Seeing that the heavenly demons had retreated, Zhang Yan returned to the victorious heavenly ship with Dan Yi and the other 2. Although the extraterrestrial heavenly demons were a huge problem, no matter what, things did not head in the worst direction this time. The side of the human Tao had also bought enough time to accumulate strength. Inside the ship's hull, the 4 of them sat down. Dan Yi sighed and said, "In the past, when the human Tao was at its peak, even if the demons and heavenly demons were present, they could be suppressed together. But now, our strength is still slightly weaker. Michihito Ichido thought about something and said, although Lu Lin and the other fellow Taoists have gone through a great calamity, it is hard to guarantee that they don't have a backup plan. If they make proper arrangements, they might be able to come back alive. If that's the case, we can still be of some help. Fu Qingming thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, this is a little difficult. Those fellow Taoists must have a backup plan. It is just that we do not know how they have arranged it, so it is difficult for us to reach out and help. Although true yang cultivators were wily, it was not that there was nothing in the world that could threaten them. It was like when people of the same generation had disagreements and fought with each other, or like the battle between the emotional path and the emotionless path. So in the past, when they were in Busha Heaven, even if some powerful beings were safe, they would arrange a path of survival in advance, just in case. So it was very likely that Lu Lin and the others had arranged a path of retreat. Of course, this was on the premise that the human Tao had not been destroyed. Now that the demons had retreated, there should be no problems. However, whether the Tao God could come back alive was also very difficult to say. Although most true yang cultivators would study deeply before doing such a thing to ensure that there would be no problems, there were not many who could actually succeed in the end, since ancient times until now. Firstly, there needed to be a trustworthy person to protect them. Fu Qingming had also asked Zhang Yan to protect him, which was why he was able to ensure that nothing went wrong. However, when it involved a cultivator's life and death, they usually wouldn't tell others about it. Another thing is that even if you become a Tao God, you still need to rely on something. This is a weakness. As the saying goes, if the skin doesn't exist, where will the hair attach itself to? If you protect it well, then you can live for a long time. But if your foundation is revealed and it is destroyed by others, then no matter how powerful you are, you will still disappear. In fact, none of the Tao gods in the past could survive until today. Dan Yi was not optimistic either. Fellow Taoist Fu spent nearly 1,000,000 years to come back. Who knows how many years it will take those Taoists to return? We cannot count on fellow Taoists. We can only rely on Taoists to cast their spells. We cannot rely on this Taoist Dao method as soon as possible. I can Dao Taoists. Early, Dao God Tian. Zhang Yan said, there are no Taoist treasures or supernatural powers here. Refining a Taoist treasure requires precious materials. Only after becoming the owner of Bu Su Heaven can we harvest them. However, we can deduce the supernatural powers and secret techniques first. Hearing this, the three of them started to think. After a while, Dan Yi Zhang Dao said, this matter cannot be rushed. To revive humanity, we still need to get the Zhou Huanyuan Jade. The void primordial sea is now filled with demons and devils. It is no longer a peaceful place. When the formation in Bu Su Heaven is dissolved, you should move your disciples in. Zhang Yan and Fu Qingming nodded happily. This was also one of the things they prepared to do. Michihito Ichido did not accept any disciples. At most, he only had some servants around him. But because he could not participate in the battle for the primordial jade, he was also considering accepting disciples. After the three demon masters made an agreement with humanity's Yuan Zun, they went to the depths of the void primordial sea. They found an evil world and used it as a foundation to open up a heaven region. It was not that they could not create heaven and earth out of thin air. It was just that it was not natural. Although they were Wei Dao God Tian, their cultivation base was not enough. If they relied on this, it would be fine for a short period of time. But in the long run, there would be flaws. It was very likely that humanity's Yuan Zun would use it to infiltrate. After the world was settled, Qi Yao stretched out his finger and pointed. A trace of qi of primordial qi flowed out and turned into a drop of Shen blood. It dripped down from the tip of his finger and landed on the surface of the ground below. In an instant, it gathered into a deep pool. It was dark and gloomy, swallowing all the starlight. Heng Jing waved his sleeve and a section of his finger fell off. It turned into a large tablet by the side of the pool. There were countless strange seal patterns on it. On the other hand, Mei Su raised her slender hand and made a hand sign, activating her mana. Suddenly, there was an indescribable thing that was like a tide surging outside her body. It gradually filled up the boundaries of this place and merged together. From then on, there would not be any spiritual vigor born in this place. It would only continue to gather the indescribable things that were lost in the real world. After the three of them had done this, they decided to open the heaven and earth gate. After a short while, there was an endless amount of demons pouring in. Although the demon tide had subsided, the barrier between the two worlds had been opened. At every moment, there were countless extraterrestrial demons rushing into the present world. However, without the demon masters leading them, it was not easy for them to cross the heaven and earth gate. As long as the unknown thing that they used to reside in disappeared, they would not be able to survive and would soon disappear. Therefore, the three of them thought that ordinary demons would not be able to move freely in the void primordial sea without metamorphosis. Moreover, they had to fight for Bu Su Tian in the future, so they could not do everything by themselves. Therefore, they might as well summon some of them and use their mana to change them for their own use. Those demons were originally shapeless and would die in an instant. However, after they were thrown into the serene pool, their vitality was fixed. They were nurtured by a drop of blood, and their bones, tendons, organs, flesh, and blood were born. Once their bodies were born, it was as if they had received a call. They climbed out of the pool and stumbled towards the large tablet. When they were near, they sat down and watched with rapt attention. As more and more people came to watch, there was a dim light on the large tablet. What was recorded on the tablet was the cultivation method of the Sky Demon sect. However, the bodies of the three of them were here to study Zhang Yan. Although they knew how to transform themselves, they could not pass it down. Therefore, Heng Jing chopped off a finger and turned it into this tablet. Because it was a part of his body, it naturally contained all kinds of mysterious changes. If the newly born demons could understand it, they would naturally be able to cultivate remarkable techniques. Heng Jing said, "If there is anyone with spirituality, we can take them in as our disciples." Lan Su stood there without saying a word. She only used her eyes to stare at the living beings under the tablet. After a long time, a living being's entire body shook as surging black smoke emitted from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. After that, the flesh and blood on his entire body were scorched, and he wailed as he lay on the ground before transforming into a strand of black smoke that drifted up into the sky until he vanished. Moreover, along with his fall, more and more living beings in the surroundings followed in his footsteps. This was because they were unable to comprehend the Tao art from the steel, so they'd exhausted their vital energy and died. Heng Jing watched as the living beings' flesh and blood dried up and fell to the ground, but none of them succeeded in entering Tao. His expression gradually turned ugly. At this moment, a living being suddenly shone with dim light. Eyebrows appeared on his head, and his eyes became clear. With just a thought, a Taoist robe covered his body. Then he tied up his hair, took out a hairpin and put it on. Then he floated on the clouds and came before the three of them. He knelt down and said, "Greetings to the three demon masters." Heng Jing looked at him and nodded. "You are the first disciple in my sect. I will give you the name of Meng Shou. In the future, if you can understand Tao, you can be ranked in front of me." Meng Shou kowtowed again and stood at the side. Qi Yao shook his head and sighed. Heng Jing said in surprise, "Demon Master Qi Yao, why are you sighing?" Qi Yao said, "I'm sighing because Demon Master Qi Zhou is the first demon master to enter the world. His understanding of Tao is far above the three of us. If we can learn from him, maybe we won't have to face any obstacles today." Meng Su said, "Although Demon Master Qi Zhou might not be of the same mind as me, if the three of us sincerely invite him, he might agree because we are from the same origin." Qi Yao's tone became even more regretful. He said, "That's true, but it's also because of this that I can't do this." Heng Jing asked, "Why is that?" He pointed at the place below and said, "This person was born from the three of us, so whether he enters Tao or not, he can be considered as our disciple. Demon Master Qi Zhou's Tao is much better than mine. If he comes here, I will definitely respect him. Then, the sect that he establishes in the future will not be used by us." Meng Su thought for a while and said, Demon Master Qi Yao is thinking about the long term. We really can't let Demon Master Qi Zhou interfere in this matter. Otherwise, in the long run, we can only listen to him. Meng Su said, we don't have to fight for now. Once we build a solid foundation and finish deducing that Tao, it won't be too late to fight with those Taoists in the modern world. After Zhang Yan and Dan Yi finished their discussion, they took their leave. At this moment, he felt something in his heart and looked in a certain direction. With the identity of the Demon Master, he could see any place where there was an unknown object. Qi Yao and the other two did not intentionally hide it from him, so he could see everything clearly and understood this person's intention. His eyes flashed. This person's current actions should be to fight with human path in the future. However, it was obvious that it was just now entering the modern world, and that Tao was not complete. Therefore, he wanted to build a solid foundation before doing anything. From the perspective of the heavenly demon, this was undoubtedly the right thing to do. However, he was a human path cultivator. Since he saw it now, he could not allow this person to proceed so smoothly. However, it was not appropriate to directly interfere. With a thought, he raised his hand and a black jade scroll appeared in the void. Then, with a wave of his sleeve, he tossed it into the domain where the three demons were. What was recorded here could be called a superior Tao, and it was extremely compatible with the heavenly demon. However, at the level of true Yang, if one wanted to enter the upper realm, they would have to walk their own Tao path. For example, the fundamental superior sutra of the demons was like this. If Qi Yao and the others saw this scroll and gave up on their own Tao path, they might be able to gain some benefits in the short term. However, in the long term, the losses would outweigh the gains, and it was even possible that they would be cut off from the path of the great Tao. As for what they would choose, he had no control over it. Therefore, after tossing the jade scroll, he decided not to worry about it any further. However, as he looked around, he realized that although Qi Yao and the other great demons were safe in one place, there were still countless devils roaming outside. In fact, many of the living beings in the void had already been defiled. If they broke into one of the worlds, it would be a great disaster for the living beings there. Therefore, he had to think of a way to solve this problem. After thinking about it for a moment, he came up with a plan. Perhaps I should return to the mountain and sea realm, he thought to himself. For the fastest and most up-to-date novel reading, please visit Chapter 1720. After Zhang Yan made up his mind, he first came to the Kuan residence. When he arrived, he sensed the atmosphere and found that only sect leader Qin and Sun Jinren were still cultivating here. With a thought, the scenery in front of him changed, and he was already in front of sect leader Qin's cave dwelling. As soon as he arrived at this place, he heard the rumbling sound of the mansion's door opening. Then a clear spring flowed out from inside, and in a split second it converged into a bridge in front of the cliffs on both sides. Sect leader Qin had already left the immortal's cave and was standing in front of the stairs to welcome him. Zhang Yan bowed in front of the bridge and said, "Greetings, sect leader spiritual master." Sect leader Qin also bowed and said, "Greetings, Hall Master Du Zhen." After the greeting, he invited him into the cave dwelling. The two of them sat in the inner room and saw the underground spring gurgling. After a short while, 2 teacups were lifted up by the waves and flowed in front of the two of them. Then, tender leaves floated down and floated on the teacups. Instantly, a strange fragrance surged out. Sect leader Qin made a gesture of invitation and said, "Hall Master Du Zhen, did something change in outer space this time?" Zhang Yan raised his cup and drank, then put it down. He said, "This time, I worked together with a few of my fellow Taoists to fight against the enemy. We have already averted the disaster, but the danger has not been eliminated. This time, I came back to discuss an important matter with sect leader spiritual master." Sect leader Qin said, "Please speak, Hall Master Du Zhen." Before, Zhang Yan did not talk about Bushutian because it involved the Xiantian demons. If one's cultivation was not at his level, he might be able to sense it. But now, he did not have such concerns, so he told sect leader Qin about the great change and the subsequent fight against the demons. After saying this, he continued, "Although the Xiantian demons and I have made peace, We both know that it is only a temporary truce. There will still be a battle in the future. In the long run, the harm of the Sky Demon is even greater than the Xiantian demons and is also my greatest enemy. However, after the great change in the world, my human Dao strength has been greatly damaged and needs to recover. If I can recover to my previous strength, then it will not be a problem to subdue them. Sect leader Qin said, according to Hall Master Du Zhen, the key is that Zhou Huanyuan Jade. Zhang Yan nodded. Back then, Disciple was guided by the ancestral master to go to the Yuhuan heavens and obtained a Zhou Huanyuan Jade from the ancestral master. That was how I was able to use it to achieve true yang. It can be said that without this item, our human Dao cultivators will never be able to reach higher realms. In fact, for those who did not have a solid foundation, or those whose cultivation was insufficient, even if they obtained the Jade of Zhou Yuan, it might not be of any use. Even if they did not mention this, stepping into the true yang realm was also extremely dangerous. If there was no guidance or supreme inheritance, the chances of success would be very slim. Therefore, one's own cultivation was the most fundamental of all. Sect leader Qin thought for a while and said, "The Void Primordial Sea does not have this item?" Zhang Yan nodded. That is correct. All of the Zhou Huanyuan Jades came from Busu Heaven. Even the one passed down by the ancestral master came from there. If our human Dao wants to flourish, we must occupy this place. Now that extraterrestrial devils have invaded the world, the Void Primordial Sea will become a place of war. It will not be a safe place. Therefore, Disciple proposes that all living beings of the mountain and sea realm, as well as the upper and lower realms, move into Busu Heaven to cultivate. First, it will preserve our strength and avoid the war. Second, it will make it easier for us to compete with the Khanate demons for the Zhou Huanyuan Jade. Sect leader Qin thought for a moment, then said, "When I return to the sect, I will ask the sect leaders and fellow Taoists of the Eastern Wastelands to discuss this matter." Zhang Yan said, "Disciple knows that this matter involves too many people. After all, we have been operating in the mountain and sea realm for a long time. It would be a pity to abandon it. However, I have already asked a fellow Taoist about this matter. Perhaps there is no need to make a big fuss about it. At the moment, I am not sure. Once I go to Busu Heaven, I will know for sure." Sect leader Qin nodded. "In that case, we can discuss it after Temple Lord Du Zhen returns from Busu Heaven." After the two of them had come to an agreement, Zhang Yan did not disturb sect leader Qin's cultivation. He left, then sent a will incarnation to the mountain and sea realm. However, he did not return to the sect. All of the disciples were in secluded meditation, and there was no need for him to concern himself with the affairs of the sect. The reason he had returned today was for another matter. With that thought in mind, he suddenly vanished. When he reappeared, he was in front of desolate Thunder Mountain in the Guanyun continent of the western sky. This was the location of the Anatta sect, and it was possible to see that for tens of thousands of kilometers below, there was a raging pool of lightning. As soon as he arrived, he felt a surge of inspiration. The violent lightning went dormant, and boundless golden light shone down from the sky. It was as if the sun had descended, hanging high in the sky. This movement was immediately detected by the Taoist cultivators in the sect. 3 beams of clear light surged up from the mountain into the air, then flickered and transformed into 3 figures. Zhang Zhen walked out, a look of joy in her eyes. She curtsied and said, "So it's Big Brother. Please forgive me for not coming out to greet you." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "We are brother and sister, there is no need for such polite words." Behind him, Kong Shutong and Elder Tsong also curtsied and said, "Greetings, Temple Lord Zhang." Their voices carried a hint of reverence. They only felt that when Zhang Yan stood there, it was as if he was facing the entire vast void. A feeling of stagnation assaulted their faces, causing them to not dare to move their qi rashly. Zhang Zhen said, "Big Brother, you are a guest from afar. Please come in and have a seat." Zhang Yan nodded and followed the 3 of them into the main hall of the Anatta sect. Zhang Zhen said, "I heard that Big Brother went to the outer world to seek the Tao. When did you return?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Just now." It hasn't been long since you came back. There will be some changes in the structure of heaven and earth, and it will involve the mountain and sea realm. You should be prepared. Zhang Zhen was a smart girl. She knew that this was not a small matter. Kong Shudong and Elder Tsong looked at each other. They guessed that this would involve some secret, so they said, "Reverend Sect Master, we still have some matters to attend to, so we will take our leave." Zhang Zhen nodded her head lightly, allowing the two of them to retreat. Only then did she raise her eyes and look at him, saying, "I wonder what elder brother is talking about?" Zhang Yan briefly explained the matter, then said, "There are Xiantian demons and even extraterrestrial demons in the world. There are too many variables in the void primal sea, so we cannot stay for long. We can only go to Bushutian. Reverend Sect Master will invite the other sects to discuss the matter in a few days. You should know what to do." Zhang Zhen thought for a moment, then said, "I will remember it." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Last time when you reached mortal shedding, I had some matters to attend to, so I missed a congratulatory gift from you. Today is the time to make up for it." With that he took out a jade slip and handed it over. Zhang Zhen took it and circulated her magic power. She was surprised to find that it was a Taoist technique. She knew that since it was a gift from her big brother, it would not be simple. She looked at it with rapt attention, and after a while, her eyes shone with a strange light. After she became the sect leader, the various sects and clans of the 9 continents had long since put aside their past grievances. Other than a few powerful outsiders in the mountain and sea realm, the Anatta Temple had no enemies from the outside. Logically speaking, all they had to do was focus wholeheartedly on cultivating the Tao. The reason the Anatta Temple was able to establish itself was because the other Taoist sects needed them to suppress the spirit sect. Originally, their divine abilities and magics were used to deal with the devilish creatures formed from the impure air, as well as the various divine abilities and Taoist techniques of the spirit sect. But as time passed, ever since the cultivators of the 9 continents left heaven and earth and came to the mountain and sea realm, the spirit sect was no longer an outside enemy. Furthermore, with the 6 sects of the spirit sect keeping watch over the abyss, even the devilish creatures formed from the impure air would be suppressed. As a result, their original cultivation techniques were no longer useful. Unfortunately, the techniques of the temple were closely related to the exorcism of devils. If they couldn't do that, then their cultivation would be hindered, and they had no choice but to make changes. Based on her current cultivation base, it wouldn't be difficult for her to start anew. She could create a new technique that was not inferior to the Anatta temples. However, if she wanted to change the original technique, it would be a bit tricky. That was something she had been worrying about recently. On the jade slip that Zhang Yan had given her was a description of a technique. If she could extrapolate it, then not only would she be able to solve the problem that had been plaguing her for a long time, it would also reveal a great Tao that led to the heavens. What was even rarer was that this technique did not contradict the original technique of the Anatta Temple, and seemed to originate from the same source. She sighed and said, "Elder brother, you've really helped me a lot." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Last time I returned to the sect, the elder Tsong of your esteemed sect came to the Qinsong school with a congratulatory gift. He mentioned it a bit, but I didn't respond because I felt that the time wasn't right. Now that I'm giving it to you, I think it's the right time." Zhang Zhen stood up, bowed and said, "On behalf of all the disciples in the sect, I thank elder brother for your kindness." Zhang Yan accepted it calmly. Although Zhang Zhen was his sister, she was also the headmaster of the Anatta Temple. Now that she was thanking him on behalf of the sect, he didn't have to reject this gift. After Zhang Zhen thanked him, she sat down again and said, "Elder brother's technique seems to be very compatible with the technique in my temple?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Do you still remember that in order to deal with the spirit sect, I purposely borrowed the Exorcist classics from your temple to have a look? Therefore, I had some understanding of your supernatural Tao techniques. It was also based on this that I was able to extrapolate such a technique." Zhang Zhen sighed and said, "So it's because of the cause of that day that there will be today's result." She observed for a while longer and unconsciously raised her hand to rub her forehead and said, "Elder brother's Tao technique seems to have another mystery." I can feel that the supernatural power in this technique is also used to suppress a certain kind of unusual species. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Look carefully. Not only can this technique be used to suppress the demon formed by the impure qi, it can also be used to suppress the extraterrestrial demon. In the next tens of thousands of years, this generation will be the greatest enemy of all living beings in the world. Therefore, I extrapolated this technique. However, whether or not you should use this Tao, I will not make the decision for you. It's all up to you, headmaster of an." There was a light in Zhang Zhen's eyes. She could naturally see that if the disciples in the sect obtained this technique, they would definitely have to face the extraterrestrial demon. It was extremely dangerous, but at the same time, it was an opportunity for the Ananta temple to grow stronger. Therefore, she would definitely not let it go. Chapter 1721. After Zhang Yan stayed in Huanzhen Temple for a few days, he returned his consciousness to the victorious heavenly ship. However, when he arrived, he saw that Dan Yi and the other two teamed up to open up another heaven. Michito Ichito's original residence was destroyed by the Tai Golden Bead. Considering that the primordial demon and the extraterrestrial demon had set up some tricks in the void primordial sea, the three of them thought that they should have some countermeasures. They should set up a Tao orthodoxy to fight against the demons and monsters. At the very least, it should be a place for the living beings to avoid the calamity. At this moment, the three of them were sitting around an altar. There were countless golden lights that flew up and hung in the sky. There were as many as the stars in the sky. Upon closer inspection, it was a brilliant golden talisman. There were countless mysterious patterns drawn on it. Dan Yi saw Zhang Yan and stood up. He bowed and said, "Taoist friend Zhang, you came at the right time. Just now, we are still talking about this place. We still lack Taoist friend's method." Zhang Yan responded with an "oh," and looked at the golden talisman. He said, "Are you referring to this item?" Michito Ichito pointed and said, "There are 3 methods of entering Tao that we have deduced. I will scatter this to the myriad of worlds so that the Tao can flourish and the living beings will have the ability to defend against the enemy. If there is an outstanding talent, as long as you have this item, you can come here to cultivate. If Taoist friend is interested, you can leave a method too." Zhang Yan thought for a while and pointed at it. He also transferred a Tao method into it. His incantation looked ordinary on the surface, but in reality, it contained a Tao technique that did not require spiritual vigor to open meridians and break through. He took into consideration that the living beings in the heavenly regions that did not have much spiritual vigor could not cultivate. If they were attacked by external enemies, they could only endure it passively. With this technique, there was still hope for them to have more power to resist. However, this method could only open meridians and break through. In the past, he was limited by his lack of cultivation experience and other restrictions. He could not continue with the subsequent methods. Now that his cultivation experience had improved and he was one of the few almighties in the heavens, no one dared to stop him. When he had time, he could try to deduce it again. Dan Yi waved his sleeves and all the golden talismans turned into countless golden lights. They broke through the heaven and earth door and flew towards the myriad of worlds. He then looked at the direction where the golden lights disappeared and did not speak for a long time. He knew that the void primordial sea was infinitely vast. It did not necessarily cover all the worlds with living beings. However, as long as living beings broke through the heaven and earth, they would naturally spread the method. Fu Qingming then said, "Taoist Zhang previously mentioned deducing the sealing method. I have been thinking about it for the past few days and I have some ideas. I was just about to discuss it with all of you." Michito Ichito also said, "What a coincidence. I also have some ideas and would like to discuss with all of you." They all knew that whether it was refining a Tao tool or gathering precious materials, it was not something that could be done in a short period of time. During this period of time, they could only rely on the secret method. Hence, they placed great importance on this matter and had been thinking about it secretly. Now that they were talking about this matter, the 4 of them sat down and exchanged their experiences. After about a year, they worked together to deduce a sealing method. It was very difficult to seal a true young cultivator. As long as the true young cultivator did not die, it was meaningless to destroy the Dharma body that fell into the present world. Hence, it was even more difficult to achieve this than to kill the true young cultivator. Even if the Dharma body was restrained, it was useless. Such a cultivator could create another Dharma body at any time unless they could prevent it from falling into the present world. It was obviously impossible to deduce such a secret method in a short period of a year. Otherwise, all kinds of sealing methods would have run rampant in Busha heaven. The method of the four of them was actually combining the use of a formation to slightly restrict the same generation. As long as they trapped a true young cultivator, although they could not suppress him forever, it was not a problem to trap him for thousands of years. However, there were many flaws. Because it was a formation, there was no way to directly target a cultivator. Before using it, the opponent had to be attracted to the formation before it could be activated. In addition, it needed at least two people to control it at the same time. Only then could it display its full power. Although there were all kinds of restrictions, it was still a method of suppression. Even if the great demons chose to turn against them, there was still a way to restrain them. Michihito Ichido said, "The power of this method can still be increased. Right now, the limit is that the object is not strong enough to support the formation. I still need to use my origin chi to make up for it. When we get to Busha heaven, we can find some heavenly materials to support it. It would be best to refine them into a formation. That way, we won't be limited to just one place." Fu Qingming shook his head. It is difficult to refine a formation. It is better to refine a suitable magic treasure. A formation that could trap a true young cultivator would at least be able to suppress them in terms of Dharma power. That was not all. Because it was not something that could be done in a short time, it needed to be weakened in the subsequent battles. To be able to do that, the object that supported it would not be weaker than a Tao artifact. Michihito Ichido said, "Fellow Taoist, you worry too much. There is a compatibility of supernatural powers. In fact, the object that supported it does not need to be too high grade. It is enough. At most, we can support it from behind. We can always restrain it. You can leave this matter to me. At most, I can refine it in 100 years." Fu Qingming still felt that it was inappropriate. He was about to speak again when he suddenly felt something and looked into the void. Zhang Yan also sensed something and his eyes flashed. Danny looked up for a moment and said solemnly, "This change in chi activity is coming from the Khanate demon. According to the previous agreement, he should have something to say to me." Michihito Ichido stood up and said, "It should be related to Busu Tian. Then let's go." The few of them nodded and stopped talking. They flew out of this world and followed the aura. After a while, they landed in a desolate world and saw Bai Wei and Lu Li waiting there. Seeing the four of them arrive, Bai Wei bowed and said, "Greetings, Yuan Zun." Danny raised his hand and returned the greeting. "So just now, you called for me. What is the matter?" Bai Wei said, "We have already removed the Busu Tian formation and left all the treasures we have found in the inner realm. Once everyone returns, you will see them. According to the agreement, we will avoid the mortal Tao cultivators, so we will bid our farewells here." Michihito Ichido coldly said, "Don't forget to fight the foreign world's devil with me." Bai Wei said, "If the foreign world's devil comes again, we will appear." After he finished speaking, he bowed again and the two of them disappeared without a trace. After the two of them left, Dan Yi turned around and said, "Since there are no more obstacles in Busu Tian, there is no need for us to stay outside. Let's occupy this place as soon as possible and decide the general situation." Qi Yao and the others were still standing on a high mountain in the nether realm created by the heavenly demon. As more and more devils were attracted, more and more creatures crawled out from the nether pool. However, up until now, there were only 5 who were able to truly catch a glimpse of the Tao art and successfully survive. The 3 of them felt that there were many flaws here. If they didn't find a way to change it, then even after tens of thousands of years, they still wouldn't be able to find anything useful. One must know that these living beings could be considered to have come from the same source. Every time one of them entered the path, they would benefit from it. The more people who succeeded, the more they could complete their path. But if there were only a few of them, they wouldn't be of much use. Heng Jing said, "If this method doesn't work, then perhaps we can look at the jade demon Lord Qi Zhou gave me." Qi Yao said, "If we can't move it, then we won't move it." Heng Jing was confused. The Tao spell demon Lord Qi Zhou passed down is profound. Why doesn't fellow cultivator Qi Yao allow me to look at it? Is there a problem with it? Qi Yao shook his head. It is because the Tao spell is too profound that we can't rashly look at it. Lan Su said, "Are you afraid that it will disturb our original Tao spell?" Qi Yao said solemnly, "That's right. This is the technique of the Qizhou demon lord, not ours. Although we have studied his Dharmakaya to refine this worldly form, we are still different from him. If we act according to this, we may be able to benefit from it, but that is merely the Tao of clinging to others. Everyone, think about it. If we were to fight against the Qizhou demon lord in the future, we do not know his true techniques, but he knows all the variations of our supernatural powers. How would we fight then?" Heng Jing said, "Demon Lord Qi Yao's words are not without reason. However, what is recorded inside is a superior Tao. If we give it up, it would be a pity." Lan Su said, "There's no need to give it up. We don't cultivate, but we can let our disciples cultivate. If they achieve something, we can use it as a reference." Heng Jing said, "That's one way. These disciples were created by their essence. They could destroy them with a thought. No matter how they cultivated, they wouldn't be afraid of any problems." Lan Su said, "But we have to solve the problem in front of us. Although we can enjoy eternal life, if this plan is delayed for too long, Yuan Zun might find a way to suppress us first." Qi Yao said, "This path involves the righteous path of our future, and it cannot be changed. However, it is too slow to do things step by step. These 2 days, I have looked around the various worlds and found a way. Although I don't know if it will work, it is worth a try." Heng Jing said, "What is it?" Qi Yao changed his mind and took out a filthy thing out of thin air. He twisted it in front of the 3 of them. Heng Jing took a look and said in disdain, "Isn't this the devil that the cultivators of the modern world talk about?" When he entered the modern world, he already knew that although this thing was called a devil, it was born from the spiritual vigor. It was something that originally existed in the modern world. It was not the same as them. Therefore, in the eyes of the 3 of them, these things were no different from cultivators. Qi Yao said, "This thing is also formless and incorporeal, and it can arouse the desires of a person. It can even devour souls and silently take over living beings as its own. It can be said to be the greatest enemy of all Taoist cultivators in this world. If we can change an ordinary demonic creature into one like this, or make it listen to my command, then have it infiltrate the minds of all the Taoist cultivators or Yao cultivators, and guide it to cultivate our cultivation method. If this method succeeds, then I will be able to gain countless people to serve me, and the matter of perfecting my Tao will no longer be difficult." Chapter 1722. After Zhang Yan, Dan Yi, and the others arranged everything in the primordial void sea, they prepared to go to Bu Su Tian with the 3 of them. In just a moment, the 4 of them had already landed in front of Li Heng World. This place was the door between the 2 worlds, where the mysteries of heaven intersected. To enter from the primordial void sea, one had to pass through this place. Patriarch Huantong also used this point to turn his body into a restriction and used the spatial concealment jade embryo to suppress it. Just now, it had stopped the Khanate demons for millions of years. Dan Yi sensed for a moment, and with a change of heart, an incarnation had already gone inside to explore. According to the agreement, the demons would not play any tricks inside. However, after the great change, the cultivators of the human path were all stranded outside. Later on, although Ancestor Huantong and the others had also entered, it was hard to say if there were any obstructions here. Hence, they were here to investigate a little. After a short while, that strand of vital energy returned to his body, and he said, "There's no obstruction in passing through this place. Fellow Taoists, let's go in right now." As soon as he finished speaking, a golden light rose from the ground, and he'd already entered it. Seeing the three of them enter, Zhang Yan also changed his mind and went inside. In an instant, he only felt that he was wrapped by a thick layer of pressure, and he gradually sank. He could not use his magic power. This feeling was like returning to the time when he was a mortal. However, his mind was calm, and he was not moved at all. After what seemed to be a long time, the front suddenly opened up, as if a drowning person had suddenly floated to the surface of the water. His breath suddenly became free, and he then looked up. The first thing that entered his eyes was a vast and boundless world. Although it was daytime, there were stars in the sky, and they gathered into a vast galaxy that stretched across the sky. The clouds were like piles of snow, and the vast blue sky reflected the proud rainbow. Celestial mountains, floating peaks, and solitary cliffs were faintly discernible. The great river was surging majestically, and it seemed endless. It flowed for millions of miles and disappeared into the sky. No matter if it was the scenery of mountains and rivers or the atmosphere of the myriad of people here, all of them were bright in color and rich in layers, and it just happened to be like a grand painting. In this place, they could feel the spiritual vigor sprinkling down like rain. Even though they had long stopped using spiritual vigor, it still made them feel comfortable. Zhang Yan had long heard that this place was filled with boundless spiritual opportunity. This matter could not be confirmed, but the signs of prosperity far surpassed any other world he had seen before. Fu Qingming looked at the vast world in front of him with a slightly complicated look in his eyes. Most of his memories from his previous life had been discarded, but he had glimpsed a lot of scenery from the jade scrolls left behind by his predecessor. Looking at it now, he only felt that everything in front of him was unfamiliar. He said, "I've seen someone praise this scene on a jade scroll. The stars and rivers converge together in the boundless. The sky is blue and blue, reflecting the torrent. The painting of mountains and rivers is always difficult. Endless admiration is a divine beauty. Seeing it today, it is indeed so." Zhang Yan looked into the distance. At this moment, he could already feel that what he saw in front of him was actually just the surface. However, if he were to look deeper, he would realize that there were countless worlds being born and dying here every moment. It was just that the void primordial sea was different. All these changes were covered under the most ordinary things. His gaze landed on a tree with luxuriant branches and leaves. Every single leaf carried a world that was overflowing with vitality and flourishing. At this moment, a leaf floated to the ground, and the world there gradually dissipated in the process. At the same time, a new leaf bloomed, and a new world was born. Here, one withered and one flourished, representing the prosperity and decline of one world after another. In every world in the leaf, there were countless living creatures living in it. In their consciousness, this tree was the formation and origin of all the worlds. It was the most ancient and magnificent existence, and the source of all things. However, in his opinion, it was just an ordinary tree that could be pushed down at any time. There were many similar situations. The river surged, and every drop of water contained a world. Even the grains of sand on the ground contained a world within them. The place where he was standing right now could be said to have harmoniously integrated all the vast power and insignificance together. There was no distinction between them at all. No wonder the Jade Slip often said that one could only chase up to the upper realm in Busha Heaven. This was because this world itself was a reflection of the Great Tao, and it was presented in a way that could be understood. Just by seeing this, his understanding of the Tao became a little clearer. After arriving here, Dan Yi did not speak for a long time. After 1,000,000 years, he returned here again, and his heart was filled with emotions. After a while, he looked up and said, "Before the change of the falling sky, there were 12 major heavens, 36 lesser heavens, and 72 world continents. But now, all of these no longer exist. The so-called major heavens, lesser heavens, and even world continents were all created by cultivators, especially the major heavens. Only true young cultivators could create it, and it was the place where they cultivated. The 12 major heavens had 12 human Dao Yuan Zun stationed there. However, after the change of the falling sky, the human Tao cultivators were expelled from this place, their residences collapsed, and the myriad worlds perished. So, none of the major heavens still existed. Zhang Yan said, I read from fellow Taoist Lu Lin's Jade Scroll that there is a chaotic heaven above the major heavens. Is that true? Danny replied, there seems to be such a world. We can also vaguely sense it, but in the end, no one can find that place, and no one has ever seen an upper realm cultivator. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. In this place, how wily you are determines how many worlds you can sense. For example, those people from the lesser worlds can only be confined to their own world, and will never know about the outside world. They are like frogs in a well who don't know how big the sky is, and cicadas in summer can't tell spring and autumn. As for the chaotic heaven, perhaps only when one reaches a higher realm, or when the opportunity arrives, could one touch it just now. Otherwise, there is no possibility of the two worlds ever intersecting. Danny looked back and saw a golden light stretching into the distance, disappearing into the depths of the blue sky. He pointed and said, Fellow Taoist Zhang, please look, this is the 10,000 sky golden rainbow. We don't need mana, and we can go to any place in the two worlds with it. Fu Qing also nodded and said, the 10,000 sky ring in the Fu clan's residences is based on this. Zhang Yan also looked over. He had also heard of this thing. As long as a cultivator knows where the void primordial sea is, and the door of two worlds is not blocked, then they can use the golden rainbow to go there. He could see that these things were not originally here, but as long as they looked back, they would naturally appear in front of them. He couldn't help but nod in his heart. No wonder this place is called the ancestral continent of the myriad worlds, the source of the heavenly cycle. Just what he saw in front of him was enough to live up to this name. He looked around and found that there were many living beings here, but because they were born in countless worlds, he couldn't see all of them. However, from what he saw, he found that human Tao was still the main force here, and the demons were not as strong as he imagined. In fact, although Bai Wei and the other Khanate demons had occupied Busha Heaven for millions of years, compared to the foundation that human Tao had planted in the past, it was still too short. Other than refining the Tao tools, they only subdued some cultivators to serve them, and they did not take the initiative to attack the living. The reason was that there were countless worlds above and below Busha Heaven, and they did not have the ability to drive all the living beings away. No matter how many they killed, as long as human Tao was not destroyed, it would be reborn. Unless the universe was reversed, then everything could be fundamentally changed. Moreover, this was not the only obstacle they encountered. If they wanted to rebuild the universe and rule the world, it was impossible to rely on just the four of them. They needed to spread the Tao. Although there were many demonic spirits in Bu Su Tian, there seemed to be a great cultivator of the human path among them that cast some kind of method that made the ordinary demonic spirits unable to resist at all. Because of this, after the four Khanate demons refined the Tao tools, they found that there was no suitable person around them, and they could not find a disciple that they liked. They could only find demon tribes outside Busha Heaven to enlighten them. Danny looked around and said emotionally, Everyone, we've returned here today. We'll reopen the universe and suppress the various worlds and revive the human Tao. He turned around and said, Fellow Fu, I remember that you were originally from Changyang Heaven. Is that right? Fu Qingming said, Correct. When Zhen Yang opened a universe, it would usually be called by the name of the tribe. The Ghastly Net tribe was the name he used after he died. This was to avoid karma, and it was also to hide his intention to remain dormant. However, ever since the Great Change, his own tribe had been separated from Busha Heaven as well, and he had even lost many of them. As a result, the Ghastly Net tribe only possessed what remained of the original universe, but it was also because of this that the Khanate demons' clones could not be found. At this moment, he gazed into the distance and sensed the place he had once opened, but it was empty. He shook his head and said, So it's all gone with the wind and clouds before me, so why do I have to pick it up again? I'll reopen the universe this time, and I'll call it Bai Luo. As soon as these words were spoken, a loud rumble resounded, and then he vanished without a trace. Michihito Ichido was in high spirits. He was different from the others. He was not a cultivator of the human ways, so he could not be regarded as an upper-class cultivator here in the past. As a result, he had hidden away in outer space long ago. Now that he was assisting the human ways in purging the demons, it would not be difficult for him to occupy a corner of the myriad world's origin with his achievements. However, the human ways had not been lost. It was still a righteous path. If he wanted to reopen the universe, he would no longer be separated from the human ways in the future. He thought for a while and said, "I promise that from now on, I will advance and retreat with humanity. Today, I will also establish myself here for a day, and I will be crowned with the name Vijay." After saying that, he also disappeared. At this moment, Dan E took out the heavenly golden lotus. He could feel that the treasure was extremely compatible with him, as if it was deeply rooted in the world and was one with it. At this moment he blurted out, "Today, I'll remember the past, and I'll be called Xiong Tian." As he spoke, his figure also disappeared. Zhang Yan stood there with his sleeves behind his back. As the three of them disappeared together, he seemed to be the only one left in the world. He could feel that at this moment, there were already 3 indescribably vast territories that appeared within his senses. They were above the heavens, but their sizes were interconnected, as if they could travel freely between them. He vaguely understood that a true young cultivator could only truly integrate into this place by establishing a universe here. The tribe he established was called Shenyuan, so if he established a universe here, it would also be called Shenyuan. He smiled slightly, and in an instant, countless Xianqi rose. In the next moment, there was a loud bang, and the heavens shook. His figure could no longer be seen, and only a clear voice leisurely came down. "Traversing the void is indescribable, and above the 9 heavens is called Shenyuan." Chapter 1723. As soon as Zhang Yan's heaven appeared, he felt as if all of heaven and earth, including the various realms of the mountains and seas, were like stars in the night sky. It was almost as if he had been born here, and not in the void Qi Sea. He swept his gaze across the heavenly worlds and realized that the living beings and cultivators were not aware of it at all. However, to them, there was no difference from before. Only as time passed and the spiritual vigor around them gradually increased would they notice the difference. After the 4 of them created their own heavens, there were now 4 great heavens in Busha Heaven. They were Xianyuan Heaven, Qiongshao Heaven, Bailuo Heaven, and Yuan Heaven. These 4 heavens were above the heavens, and they were unreachable. Without the permission of the 4 great Yuanzun, it was difficult for living beings from the outside world to enter. At this moment, Zhang Yan saw that there seemed to be layers of clouds in front of him dispersing. In an instant, a boundless land was clearly revealed. It existed in the myriad of worlds, floating in the void. With a thought, he immediately knew the origin of this place. This was the true origin of Busha Heaven. However, in the past, the powerful beings did not call it by this name. Instead, they called it the Kuan Shi continent. This place was especially mysterious. Not only were all kinds of treasures born from it, but the shape of the various worlds inside and outside were also reflected in it. The mountains were still mountains, the water was still water, and all kinds of whaley could be contained by the world. Not only could true young cultivators walk here, but as long as they did not actively use their magic, they could even talk to mortals. Zhang Yan could see that this was another kind of great Tao. If what he had seen before was the surface of Busha Heaven, then this land was the inside of Busha Heaven. He could feel that if he had not merged with Busha Heaven, he would have been able to sense it, but it would not have been easy to actually touch it. It would have taken a lot of effort to enter. Also, once the aura he left in this place was destroyed, then he wouldn't be able to return in a short period of time. As for how many years it would take for him to return, it was impossible to deduce in a short period of time. This caused him to be slightly interested. Just as he was about to calculate, he felt Dan Yi's divine will summon him, and he instantly knew that something was up. With a thought, he appeared within a palace, and there were 4 Dharma thrones that were enveloped by celestial clouds. Dan Yi held a golden lotus in his hand, and he was sitting on one of the lotuses. However, the lotus had other branches and surged with energy, and there were 3 jade slips floating above it, and they seemed to contain boundless profundities. At this moment, when he saw the 3 of them arrive, he stood up and bowed, and then he stretched out his hand in invitation and said, "Fellow Taoists, why don't you take a seat and speak?" The 3 of them bowed in return and entered their respective Dharma thrones. Just now, when they sat down cross-legged, there was a bright light shining behind them, and the scene of the world appeared above them. Brilliant light covered the ground, and brilliant light illuminated the sky. For a moment, their hearts became clear, and they gained profound comprehension. After a while, Fu Qingming calmed his mind and looked at the jade slip. He felt that it was extremely familiar, but he couldn't recall where he had seen it. At this moment, Zhang Yan looked over as well. After a short moment, his heart shook, and he somehow knew the origins of this item. His eyes flickered slightly and he said, "Is the human Tao jade slip in fellow Taoist Dan Yi's hand?" Dan Yi smiled and nodded. "It is." Fu Qingming sighed. "It really is this item." However, Michito Ichido didn't recognize it, and he asked curiously, "Looking at your expressions, it seems that this jade slip is not simple. May I know where it came from?" Dan Yi explained, "Fellow Taoist, you may not know this, but there was once a great sage among us who followed the heaven and earth, and traced the great Tao. They used their great divinity to manifest 3 inheritance jade slips to support the fate of the human Tao. The first was to worship the heaven, the second was to worship the earth, and the third was to inherit fate. It turns out that the person who was in charge was also a mighty figure. Now that he's not around, we should take over." He reached out and took one of the jade slips, and he said solemnly, "Our human Tao has returned to its original state, and we should set a calendar again and record it on this inheritance jade slip. This way, we can ensure that the fate of heaven and man will be smooth." Michito Ichido said, "Then how do we set the calendar?" Danny said, "Since the human Tao has flourished, there has been the inheritance of the Tao, and then the change in the sky. The Kunshi continent has been in the past 36,000 yuan hui. If we look further ahead, it will be the phenomenon of chaos and emptiness. It's not something that I can describe. Before 18,000 yuan hui, it was the beginning of the heavenly calendar, and after 18,000 yuan hui, it was the beginning of the heavenly calendar." At this point, he held the jade slip and said, "There's a saying here that if the land of Busu still thinks that the human Tao is the ruler, it can at least enjoy the virtue of the 3 Qian. Now that the 2 Qian have passed, the human Tao has been revived, and it will be passed on again. Therefore, it should be named Qian Xing." As soon as he said that, the jade slip trembled, and various immortal sounds and wonderful music played. Rainbow clouds flew and merged into the world. At this moment, Zhang Yan suddenly felt that the heavenly secrets were no longer as unclear as before. It was as if a layer of fog had been lifted, and in his senses, everything became gradually clear. At this moment, Dan Yi took the second jade slip and said, "This is the Earth Respect jade slip. It's the surface of Busu and the pillar of the heavenly cycle. With this, we can make everything outside the heavens beneficial to our human Tao." He threw it down and saw that on the Kunsher continent, there was a monument pillar that reached the heavens and supported the earth. In an instant, auspicious clouds gathered and auspicious mist appeared. There was also celestial music and exquisite sounds surrounding it. There were also spiritual birds flying over and auspicious beasts protecting him. Seeing that Dan didn't touch the last jade slip, Michito Ichido said, "Why don't you take this?" Seeing that Dan didn't touch the last jade slip, Michito Ichido said, "This is the fate jade slip, also known as the human jade slip. Now, the opportunity hasn't come, and it's not the time to place it." He raised his sleeves and hid the jade slip. Then, he looked up at the 3 people and said seriously, "Today, I invited everyone here because I have another matter to discuss. According to the previous agreement, in the battle between me and the demons, I have to bet on the Yuan Jade. This matter can only be won by placing more chess pieces and recruiting more disciples. It wasn't easy to fight for the Zhou Huan Yuan Jade. Before this item appeared, there were no special signs. it would be attached to something or a living being. Only when the opportunity arrived and the heavens and humans resonated would it appear. However, there seemed to be more than one such person or thing. As long as the matter didn't settle in the end, there would be other changes to the ownership, and it was even possible that the item would never appear again. In fact, this situation was still considered normal. The real situation was even more complicated. Otherwise, the location of the item would have been calculated by many powerful people. Every time this item appeared, there would be a calamity that would spread throughout the heavens. Even if you didn't covet this item, you might be dragged into it. Therefore, no matter who you were, whether you had cultivation or not, whether you were a mortal or a cultivator, you might be involved in it. Therefore, Yuan Zun present here knew about this. Dan Yi didn't elaborate and just continued. In the past, when humanity was at its peak, if there was a sign of the Yuan Jade appearing, Yuan Zun would order his disciples to search for it. It didn't involve a battle of life and death. However, due to the dissatisfaction of the calamity, it was very likely that this item would never appear again. Therefore, although there was no pointless killing, the number of times that we actually obtained this item became fewer and fewer. Michihito Ichido said, "In that case, fighting with the demons might instead cause this item to appear?" Danny nodded and said, "Indeed. Although the agreement at that time gave the demons a chance to fight for the Yuan Jade, it was only by doing so that we could use this opportunity to quell the calamity and continue to maintain humanity." Fu Qingming said, "No wonder fellows still allowed it to remain in the cloth beard. So there was this layer of intention." Danny sighed. "If the tribulation power doesn't dissipate, it will accumulate more and more until it's too late to return. We can no longer walk the path forward. Just now, I've seen that after the human Tao was expelled from the Kunsher continent, the Tao of the Kunsher continent has been severed. Although the demons can't enter this place, they can disturb it with their divine wills. Now that the living beings there have returned to the wilderness, we must come here to preach the Tao and reopen the path." Fu Qingming nodded and said, "Once the heaven is opened, my disciples have all entered the cloth beard and can go to the Kunsher continent to spread the Tao at any time. Later, we will go and spread the Tao. We will take down a city before the demons make their move." In the miraculous realm of the primordial sea of void, Bai Wei and Lu Li had been purifying the extraterrestrial demons, but recently, they noticed that the number of such demons was decreasing. They guessed that it was the work of the demons. Lu Li said, "We are in the primordial sea of void with them. The longer those demons stay in the world, the easier it will be for us to have a conflict with them. If we really have to fight them, should we avoid them first?" Bai Wei said, "Since we can't borrow the power of the cloth beard, then the primordial sea of void will be the place for us to spread our Tao. It is not the right time to fight with those demons. This is what the Yuan Zun of humanity will be happy to see. As long as they don't go too far or provoke us first, we don't have to worry about them." According to his estimation, since those demons wanted to establish themselves in the world, there would not be any changes in the situation for at least several hundred years. During this period, they might use some small tricks to test us. As long as they did not go over the limit of tolerance, then it would be a trivial matter. While the two were talking, they suddenly felt an indescribable change. The deduction of Tao became more difficult. Even the majestic chanting down below was weakened. Bai Wei's expression froze. He calculated and said in a deep voice, "This should be the reopening of the heaven. The Yuan Zun of humanity is once again suppressing the heavens." He thought about it and said with a serious expression, "Let's settle the affairs here and go back to the primordial sea as soon as possible. Otherwise, we will fall behind the others in the fight for the primordial jade." In the soul world, the three-headed demon master was also having a strange feeling. He felt that the deduction of Tao was more difficult than before. Heng Jing frowned and said, "Something big must have happened." Qi Yao pondered for a moment and said, "In the primordial sea of void, only those innate demons exist with me. Since it is difficult to understand the situation, we can start with them and test them to see if they are plotting against me." Heng Jing said, "The 6 of them advance and retreat together. If we provoke them and things get out of hand, will it attract the rest of the Yuan Zun?" Just now, we have begun to make arrangements. We are not ready to clash with them again. Qi Yao said, "You and I both know that these innate demons seem to have some discord with the Yuan Zun of humanity. Both sides appear to be united, but they are divided at heart. The cultivators of humanity don't care about their life and death. In fact, they hope that they will be defeated sooner. This is something we can use. Besides, we are just testing them. We are not really going to make a move. Let's figure out what is going on first before we make any other plans." Chapter 1724. Qi Yao and the other two had already made their move when they decided on the plan to use the turbid air to create the demonic creatures. The indescribable item and the spiritual vigor of the present world were not compatible, but under their visualization, it was easy for them to become one. This kind of demonic creature could be called provoking devil. Usually, it only used turbid in spiritual vigor as a disguise and shelter. However, once it invaded the soul of living beings, it would immediately bewitch them to try to refine it inexplicably and find another way. There were more than 800 provoking demons created in the first batch. After the three of them selected them, they scattered most of the mediocre demonic creatures into the void primordial sea. As long as they encountered the void primordial spirit, they could attach themselves to it and follow it to invade the worlds where spiritual vigor flourished. The remaining ones could be considered elites. There were about a dozen of them. Not only were they highly intelligent, but they also had many transformations. They were prepared to invade the worlds ruled by the Khanate demons. After coming up with a plan to attack the demons first, Heng Jing decided to send the demons to the demons' territory. Although the Khanate demons created the mystic Kong realm, they also guided many demonic creatures there. Hence, this realm was not a secret to demon masters like them. However, it was difficult to spy on them because they were at the same level. No one could use this to find out the other's background. It was just like how they could observe the past and see that there was something wrong between the human Dao Yuan Zun and the demons. However, it was only a vague idea and they had no way of knowing the specifics. There were many worlds created by the demons. More than a dozen provoking demons fell in but did not cause any ripples. However, one of them accidentally bumped into the mystic Kong realm. At this moment, Bai Wei and Lu Li were deducing Taoist skills. The two of them did not care about the other worlds. However, the place they were standing on could be considered the foundation of the primordial sea of the void. Usually, it was heavily guarded. If demonic beings from the outside world came, they would be able to detect it immediately. Lu Li did some calculations but could not see the background. He knew that there must be a powerful person protecting them. Currently, in the heavens, only the demonic creatures from outside had such ability. He said coldly, "Guangxing Tianzuan guessed correctly. Those demonic creatures did attack me. I'll get rid of them." He was just about to think of a way to expel it when Bai Wei raised a hand to stop him. "Wait!" He pointed below. "Ever since these disciples entered this world, they have been chanting my incantations day and night. They have some cultivation, but no matter how sincere they are, they still lack experience. This time, by borrowing the hands of these demonic creatures, they can help me test them. I also need to see what these demonic creatures are planning." Lu Li thought about it and nodded. Even though it was hard to kill the demons, they were just like ants to them. They could kill them at any time, so there was no need to be in a hurry. Miraculous Space Realm, Daikyu. This was the place where Bai Wei and Lu Li used to enlighten people. Most of the extraterrestrial demons that were enlightened by the cardinal scripture often stayed here after they were transformed. Some of them mated with monsters or even living beings to produce offspring. Golden palaces and white pagodas stretched along the undulating mountains. It could be said to be grand and magnificent. On the path of Tao, flower petals and jade dew were scattered everywhere. Inside the altars, golden pages of supreme scriptures were enshrined. From time to time, there would be chants of enlightenment being chanted. At this moment, the first rays of dawn had just appeared. Jin Yuan got up from his bed. He first took a bath and cleansed his body. He burned incense and prayed. He silently recited his cultivation method. Then he brought his own cultivation artifact and walked barefoot towards the Pyeoluo River in the east. His birth father was the first of the 300 demons that Bai Wei and Lu Li had enlightened. His birth mother was a half-demon, half-human. On the first day he was born, he could speak. In 3 days he could chant scriptures. In 7 days he knew all kinds of common things. In just 15 days he had already grown to the size of an adult. Not only was his body like this, even his intelligence was the same. That was why he was often praised by the teachers in the pagodas. Not long after, he arrived at the bank of the Pyeoluo River. It was said that the water of this river originated from the clear pond in front of the 2 heavenly lords of creation. All living beings worshipped here. They could observe the world, distinguish the true and the ordinary, and avoid the filth and poison of the world. That was why many cultivators stayed here. When he arrived, there were already thousands of people cultivating here. The chanting of scriptures came intermittently along with the rolling of the river. After arriving here, he also solemnly chanted the incantation and silently recited the world scripture. He was handsome and delicate. His white clothes fluttered. Standing by the bank of the fragrant golden river, there was a sense of transcendence from the secular world. When he finished reciting, he took out a fish-belly wooden bowl. He took down the 4 artifacts, namely the Dharma plate, the jade bracelet, the golden rope, and the Buddhist robe, and placed them in the bowl one by one. These 4 items were the artifacts of Dharma. If one could obtain all 4 items, it meant that one's understanding of Dharma and Logos had reached the root and understood one's own existence. Among the hundreds of people here, he was the only one who had obtained the 4 perfections. After doing this, he knelt down and kowtowed towards the source of the river. This was to show respect to the Heavenly Lord. Only after bowing 3 times did he stand up. He chose a quiet and clean place to sit down and began his daily chanting of scriptures. As the clear voice came out from his mouth, deer, horses, swallows, sparrows, tigers, leopards, falcons, and other birds of the land came and surrounded him. These creatures were all baptized by the fundamental scripture and had spirituality in their bodies. After listening to the Dharma for a long time, if their hearts were to gain wisdom, they could immediately transform into human form. At that time, there would be cultivators from the hall who would come to receive them. This cultivation lasted until the sun set. He felt that his mind was unusually sharp today. When he was about to finish chanting, his heart trembled. Suddenly, there was an additional scripture in his mind. He could not help but feel a surge of joy in his heart. He knew that his devout cultivation had improved and he had finally comprehended an even more superior Dharma. He closed his eyes and calmed the waves in his heart. He did not rush to look at it. The fundamental scripture was the most important foundation. If one's mind was not stable, one should not speak rashly. It would be best if he could consolidate his foundation for a night. Tomorrow, under the protection of the Master, he would open the altar and recite. After a while, he felt that his mind had calmed down. He was about to get up and return to his abode when a gust of cold wind blew over. His body trembled and he heard countless murmurs in his ears. He had not been in Tao for a long time, but his cultivation was profound. Although it was the first time he encountered such a thing, he immediately understood that there was an external demon invading his body. He quickly focused his mind and recited the exorcism incantation. After all, his cultivation was profound. Not long after, he was able to expel the external demon. But at this time, he found that there was a trace of demon that was extremely stubborn and lingered around. In the process of repeatedly wearing it down, the demon moved. He only felt a flash of light in front of him. He saw many scriptures appearing in his consciousness. There were countless mysteries in them. All kinds of things that he did not understand in the past could be solved from these scriptures. As long as he followed these scriptures, it was as if he could achieve Tao. This temptation was not small. But he sternly reprimanded, "This is an external Dharma. Do not disturb my state of mind." As he spoke, he recited even more sincerely. The demons saw that it could not bewitch him with this method. Countless unknown things were born from nothingness and attacked him from the inside and outside. Soon, his body was covered with sores and pus. His mouth and nose were rotting. His hair and teeth were falling out. He could no longer see his original clean and bright body. Jin Yuan looked at himself gradually rotting. He knew that this was not an illusion but the real situation. But he still did not change his mind. Even though he knew he was going to die, he did not waver. Not long after, he felt his consciousness sinking into a muddle. After an unknown period of time, he suddenly woke up. He was surprised to find that he was immersed in a clear pond with a strange fragrance lingering around it. His body was actually reconstructed. Not only that, his mana seemed to be even more refined than before. He seemed to have noticed something, and he raised his head, only to see two figures of golden light standing on the surface of the ground. They were so tall that they could hold up the sky, and they were extraordinarily majestic, as brilliant as the sun. Although he couldn't see them, he knew their identities in his heart. His mind shook, and he hurriedly stood up from the pool, and he bowed to the shore, saying, "Disciple Jin Yuan greets the two Sky Lords." Lu Li's loud voice came from above. "Let me ask you. Just now you have seen all kinds of Dharma. Are you tempted?" Jin Yuan said respectfully, replying to Celestial Lord, "I have my own fundamental Dharma. I have my own superior Dharma. Why would I need to seek help from others?" Bai Wei praised, "What a good own fundamental Dharma. You have your own superior Dharma. Jin Yuan, I see that you are more intelligent than others. Your thoughts are clear and upright. Today, I will take you as my disciple. Are you willing?" Jin Yuan said joyfully, "Disciple is willing." Lu Li also said, "There is a place today where the world is tainted with filth. The living beings have not developed intelligence. It needs the spirit of Tao and the sincerity of the heart to spread Dharma. Are you willing?" Jin Yuan said without hesitation, "Disciple is willing." Bai Wei smiled. 4 rays of spiritual light shot down and landed in front of him. They were the 4 Dharma artifacts that Jin Yuan used. He said, "These 4 Dharma artifacts are the Dharma plate. The jade chain is the heart. The binding feet is the movement. The shedding clothes is the body. I have refined them with great mana. They can be used for you to spread Dharma." Just now, the 4 Dharma artifacts landed on Jin Yuan's body. Golden light shone and he was bathed in the light. Bai Wei nodded slightly. He just waved his sleeve and sent Jin Yuan into the Bushitian's Kun continent. He then said, "The human Tao has already made its move. I hope that this move can make up for the disadvantage." Lu Li shook his head and said, "It's a pity that our true bodies cannot enter the continent. It is very inconvenient for many things." Bai Wei said, "Now that the extraterrestrial demon is outside, even if the human Tao cultivators don't like us, they won't fight and kill us the moment they meet. There is still a great chance. However, what Celestial Lord Jiguan said is right. It is fine if it is difficult to enter now. But if it is a critical moment, then we might lose the chance." As the two were talking, there was a flash of light. A golden-robed Taoist suddenly appeared in the clouds. He looked towards them and said, "Greetings, Taoist friends." Bai Wei and Lu Li were not surprised. They bowed and said, "Ti." Taoist priest Daoi said, "Just now, I heard from the two of you that you want to find a way to enter the Kuan-Shi continent?" Bai Wei said, "Fellow Taoist Tai, could it be that you have a way?" Taoist priest Daoi said, "With me here, this matter won't be difficult. Now that human Tao has returned to Busu, it has already gained the upper hand. Although the battle for the origin jade isn't determined by the strong, the two fellow Taoists can't fall too far behind." Bai Wei said, "Fellow Taoist Supreme Solitude, you can be at ease. This competition also involves our fate, so we will naturally do our best." Taoist priest Daoi laughed and said, "That's good. If necessary, you two can call my name and I will come out to help." As he said that, his aura changed, and just like when he came out, he disappeared without a trace. Chapter 1725. Qi Yao and the other two demons placed great importance on the demonic invasion this time. Because it was very likely that they would be able to find out more about the demons, they had been paying attention to it. However, not long after, they noticed that a demonic creature had mysteriously disappeared, but they did not see the person behind it. They suspected that it was the intervention of a great expert, so they cast a spell to find out the reason. At this moment, they felt a vast will suddenly appear there. Qi Yao thought about it and wanted to come into contact with it. In an instant, all sorts of scenes flashed past his eyes. It depicted the past grievances between Human Path and the Khanate demons. After he saw it, he smiled and said, "I see." If he was not wrong, these should have been deliberately revealed to them by the Khanate demons. The meaning was to tell them that there was no need for them to fight to the death because the demons and Human Path were not on good terms. If they fought too much, it would benefit the Human Path cultivators for no reason. The three demons shared the same mind, so Heng Jing saw it too. He said, "So there are such twists and turns here. Should we slow down?" Qi Yao scoffed and said, "Why should we slow down? Not all of the demons' words are true. There must be something hidden. Also, the situation here is similar to what I guessed earlier. Since he doesn't get along with the Human Path like this, then we are even less afraid of the Human Path cultivators helping us." As he spoke, he was about to retract his consciousness when he suddenly exclaimed in surprise. He found a wisp of qi activity that he had almost missed. He also caught it and looked at it. When he looked at it, his expression turned serious and he said softly, "The fight for the Origin Jade." What was mentioned was the cause and effect of the fight for the Origin Jade between Bu Shutian and Zhou Huanyuan Jade. Although many details were deliberately hidden, the general situation was understood. Heng Jing said in surprise, "The fight for the Origin Jade actually has such a thing? That's strange. Why would the Khanate demons tell us all this? Wouldn't one more person interfering mean one more variable?" Qi Yao pondered and said, "I see that the qi activity was hidden behind. This might not have been revealed by the demons, but by someone else." Heng Jing frowned and said, "Who could it be? Could it be a Human Path cultivator?" Qi Yao pondered for a moment and said, "I don't know about that." It was hard for him to know who had revealed this, but his heart omen had a feeling that this was definitely not the work of a Human Path cultivator. Ma Su pondered for a moment and said with a determined expression, "No matter who he is, this Zhou Huanyuan Jade can help one achieve true yang. If we can obtain it, our disciples can also use it to achieve true yang. Therefore, we must find a way to interfere in this matter. We cannot let that person leave us behind." Qi Yao agreed, "That's right. If a cultivator of Taoism obtains one more piece of primordial jade, it's possible that another Yuanzun will appear. This is extremely disadvantageous to us, so even if this item is useless to us, we must still think of a way to prevent it from falling into the hands of those two families." Heng Jing said, "The primordial jade was born in the Kuan continent of Bu Su heaven. That place is within the myriad world, in the void. Even if we are not restricted and can come and go as we please, it will be difficult for our Dharmakayas to enter. How are we going to get involved?" Qi Yao said, "The fight for the primordial jade is not only about strength, but also fate. We can first send our disciples there to plan for the future." Heng Jing said, "This is not easy. With my ability, it's very likely that we will be discovered by the Human Path cultivators just now, not to mention entering the Kuan continent." Qi Yao nodded. He also admitted this point. Although they believed that their strength was not below that of any true Yang Almighty expert in the modern world, they were still lacking in terms of Tao. It was almost impossible for them to enter Bu Su Tian without making a sound. Ma Su thought for a moment and suggested, "Qi Zhou Demon Lord's Tao techniques are profound. Maybe we can ask him for help." Qi Yao's eyes brightened. He thought for a moment and raised his head. "This is a good idea. Maybe we can give it a try." They were not willing to look at the Tao techniques in the Shen Jade Scroll, but in the end, they were all extraterritorial demon lords. Their basic interests were the same, so there was a high possibility that this matter could be done. The three of them discussed for a while and felt that this matter should not be delayed. Because of their previous agreement, their original bodies could not leave this world, so they split into 3 clones and broke through the sky and earth, heading towards the barrier between the two worlds. Not long after, the three of them saw a majestic figure standing in front of the heaven and earth door. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Demon Lord Qizhou." Zhang Yan's body of strength suddenly opened his eyes. In an instant, the world seemed to be occupied by two rays of light. He looked down and said, "What is the purpose of the three of you coming here?" Qi Yao stood up and said, "There is a difficult matter today, and we would like to ask Demon Lord Qizhou for help." Zhang Yan said, "Please speak." Qi Yao told them about the fight for the Yuan Jade. He did not hide anything and said sincerely, "The cultivation of the three of us is not enough. If we enter Bu Su Tian, we will definitely be discovered by the human Dao Yuan Zun, so we came to ask for Demon Lord Qizhou's help." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. He knew clearly what was going on between human Dao and the demons. If no one told them, these extraterrestrial demons would definitely not know. It was not impossible to say that this was deliberately leaked by the Khanate demons, but he found a detail here. In Qi Yao's description, he mentioned most of the things about the fight between human Dao and the demons, but he neglected one thing, and that was the Tai golden bead. If the Khanate fiendish demon had deliberately leaked the news, his goal was nothing more than to deter his opponent. It was impossible for such a powerful treasure not to be mentioned. Therefore, if Qi Yao and the others did not conceal it, it was not difficult to see who was behind all this. He thought about it for a moment. The Tai golden bead was born on the Kunshur continent, and it had the ability to break through worlds. If it wanted to let these extraterrestrial demons enter the world, then it would be impossible to stop it. In other words, whether he tried to help Qi Yao and the others or not, the final result would be the same. But if he helped first, he might ruin the next step of this demon's plan. After making this judgment, he said slowly, "I can help you three, but I have a condition." Qi Yao said, "Please speak, Demon Lord Qizhou." Zhang Yan said, "I see that the three demon lords have recently been establishing their teachings in the spirit world and recruiting disciples?" Qi Yao replied, "That's right. This is to compete with the present world's Yuan Zun, so that they can enter Bu Su in the future and find the method of the upper realm. Since Demon Lord Qizhou asked about this, could it be that you also have the intention of passing down your teachings?" Zhang Yan said plainly, "I am not passing down my teachings, but if the three demon lords establish their sects in the future, there must be a place for me among the offerings." If he also became the ancestor of offerings, then no matter how much they had developed their Dao, he would know. Qi Yao hesitated when he heard this condition. If he did that, then once the three of them established their sects in the future, the disciples of the younger generation would also have to acknowledge Zhang Yan's position and worship him as one of the founding masters. He was not sure if this was good or bad, so he asked with his divine will, "What do you think, fellow Taoists?" Heng Jing did not care too much about this. He thought for a while and said, "Demon Lord Qizhou is the first demon lord in the world. It is only natural for our sect's disciples to worship him, and he can't interfere with our sect's matters anyway." Ji Su said faintly, "This matter will definitely leave some loose ends in the long run, but since we have come to ask for help, we naturally have to pay some price. This condition is not too much." Qi Yao thought for a while more, then he raised his head and said, "We agree." Zhang Yan agreed. He focused his gaze, and instantly a talisman was formed in front of the three. He said, "With this item, the three demon lords can smoothly enter Bu Su heaven, and it will definitely not attract the human Dao's Yuan Zun to come out and stop you." Qi Yao reached out and took a look at it. He felt that there were many mysteries within it, but he was afraid that he would be attracted by it, so he did not look at it too much. He put it away, bowed, and said, "Thank you, Demon Lord Qizhou, for your help." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "If there is nothing else, the three of you may leave." The three bowed again, then flew into the sky and left. Zhang Yan stood where he was, but he began to think. Was Tai Golden Bead's purpose in doing this to form a connection with the demons, or was it to muddy the waters? Right now, it was still hard to tell, but at the moment, there was no way to deal with this person, so he could only let him do whatever he wanted. He thought to himself, maybe when my cultivation reaches the 3rd level, I'll be able to fight against him, but there's still a way to do it. I'll have to wait until my cultivation improves before going to the Kuan Manor. After the three demons received the talisman, they returned to the netherworld not long after. However, after returning, Qi Yao felt that he had overlooked something, and he felt a little uneasy, his expression extremely solemn. Heng Jing also felt it and asked, "Demon Lord Qi Yao? Is there something wrong?" Qi Yao shook his head and said, "Demon Lord Qi Zhou is unfathomable. It is hard for us to know what he wants to do. In the future, if there is no need, let's not interact with him." Heng Jing was surprised. "Demon Lord Qi Yao, aren't you thinking too much?" At this time, Lan Su also said, "Demon Lord Qi Yao is not wrong. This time, we had no choice. Next time, when we encounter difficulties, it is better to rely on ourselves, or else we will be easily controlled by others." Qi Yao was afraid that if he mentioned this matter too much, Zhang Yan would sense it, so he did not say anything else. He took out the talisman from his sleeve and called Lan Su in front of him, saying with concern, "You are the first of us to study the Tao and cultivate a Dharma body. Today, I will send you to Busha Heaven to spread the Tao. Remember, the cultivators of the current world all want to kill me, so you must be careful." As he spoke, he waved his sleeve and threw the talisman down, saying, "Take this talisman, it will help you safely enter Busha Heaven." Lan Su took it respectfully. Heng Jing said, "We come from the outside world, we do not have any Tao, nor do we have any instrument. Today we can give you a heart seed, in which there is a breath of Qi Ji from the three of us. No matter where you go, you will be able to use it." As he spoke, he stretched out his finger and pointed, and a dim light fell into his body. As a disciple of the three, the head of evil spirits had the deepest understanding of the Tao. As long as there was an unknown object that could be entrusted to him, his Dharmakaya would not disappear. Although it was only a wisp of the three demon lords' Qi dynamic, his cultivation was far from being comparable to the three of them. This object was enough to protect him during this journey. He understood the principle behind it, so he bowed and said calmly, "Thank you, the three high lords." After listening to a few more words, he bade farewell to Qi Yao and the other two, then left the heaven and earth pass, turned into a breath of invisible Qi, and landed in Busha Heaven. Chapter 1726. Zhang Yan's avatar sat in the Xinyuan sky, his eyes deep and serene. Just now, as soon as the demon entered the realm, he noticed it. He saw the obscure Qi activity sneak into the Busha sky and sink into the Kunsher continent. At first, he wanted to block it, but he found that other than the talisman he gave the demon, there was also a strange Qi that could block his magic power. This was not the Qi of the three-headed demon master, but the Tai golden beads method. He changed his mind. The three-headed demon master had just met him, so he wouldn't have given up the treasures so quickly. It was most likely due to his own actions. Without a master, although this treasure could not unleash its full power, it could still use some tricks. He turned to look at the Kunsher continent, which was a barren landscape. The innate demon originally wanted to destroy the human path, so he usually only refined the Tao instrument and cultivated the foundation. He did not pay much attention to other things because as long as he got rid of the human path Yuan Zun, then everything else would not be a problem. However, he could not enter the Kunsher continent, so he could only use his divine will to influence and shake the foundation of the human path. After 1,000,000 years, the inheritance of living beings in this place had been broken. Some remote places had almost become barbarians who ate raw meat and drank blood. These people were easy to be used by the demons. He thought about it, waved his sleeves, and rode out of the Xinyuan sky, heading towards the Qiongshao sky. Originally, with his ability, he could go to any place with just a thought. However, now that everyone had created their own sky, it was like their own cave abodes. Out of etiquette, it was not convenient for him to travel. Outside the border, Dan Yi already knew of his arrival, so he came out to greet him first. After greeting him outside, he invited him into the clear sky palace. Then, they sat down according to the host and the guest. Dan Yi asked, "Taoist Zhang, is there anything important that brought you here today?" Zhang Yan said, "I just now, I found out that a demon entered the Bushes sky and went to the Kunsher continent. Dan Yi's eyes narrowed and he said, otherworldly heavenly demons? His thoughts changed. How does this junior know about the Kun beginning continent? One had to know that the Kun beginning continent was located in the void of the myriad worlds. Even if one entered Busu heaven, unless they were an almighty who lived there, they might not know of its existence. Zhang Yan said, since it's not me, it's most likely from the Khanate fiendish demons. Dan Yi frowned and said, according to the agreement, it's impossible for this person to collude with the heavenly demon. So what's the purpose of doing this? Are you trying to use the heavenly demon's hand to fight against us? Aren't you afraid of getting yourself into trouble? From the looks of it, the enemies of the sky demons were all living beings in this world. However, regardless of whether you were a demon or a human, the demons were currently weaker than the humans. After learning of the grudge between the two, the sky demons might not necessarily come to deal with the humans. Instead, they might go to deal with them. Zhang Yan said with a deeper meaning in his words, you have to know that there are not only demons there. Danny thought for a moment and looked over. Tai golden bead? Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, if there's no one pushing from behind, even if the demons have this idea, they won't be able to enter Busu heaven so smoothly. Dan Yi's expression turned solemn. He pondered for a moment and finally shook his head, saying, currently, I don't have any way to restrain this person. Zhang Yan said, previously, the demons sent a disciple to the Kun beginning continent to preach, and now the sky demons are also involved. In this chess game, this junior has already placed a chess piece. We need to move faster. Danny said, fellow Taoist Fu has been handling this matter for the past few days. However, we can't rush it. We need to arrange it slowly. Now that the Tao Master is in control of Busu heaven, this junior can only preach in remote places. In the end, he can't suppress the righteous. Whether it was the Khanate demons or the extraterritorial demons, although they had sent their disciples to infiltrate, they had no other choice. On the side of the Tao, the Kun beginning continent was their home ground. They had a natural advantage, so there was no need for them to do so. A few days ago, the four of them discussed and felt that this place had been in decline for millions of years. It was not something that could be revived in a short period of time. Thus, they decided to first send people down to teach the people etiquette, literacy, establish a country, build temples and worship, and then preach Tao. Although the progress was slightly slower, once the momentum was gathered, the foundation would be solid and passed down from generation to generation. In the future, it would be difficult to be shaken. However, the Tao Masters had lost their Taoist teachings, so they didn't have an advantage when fighting the demons with innately powerful bodies. Right now, they were just barely able to keep their people alive. If the outsiders received the teachings of the demons and devils, they might not be able to survive for long. Therefore, they needed to send more people to protect them. Cultivators weren't suitable for this task, because they needed to spend a lot of time cultivating. Occasionally, they could go into the depths of the wasteland to kill greater demons and devils to sharpen themselves. However, if this went on for too long, it wouldn't work. Therefore, they needed to send more people. They had long since considered who to send here. Since the beginning of the heavenly calendar, more than 36,000 epochs had passed. During that time, many almighty beings had perished. Although they had died, true young cultivators, even if their true bodies were destroyed, they could live on for a long time. For example, in the mountain and sea realm, after Bo Bai and Bo Xian were born, they abandoned much of the impure air and were worshipped by many living beings. Gradually, they became native gods. It was the same in the Kunsher continent. Many of the surviving great figures had transformed into gods. When the human Tao was at its peak, these people were often imprisoned by cultivators. At this moment, they could be used to protect the many mortals in the Kunsher continent. After the two of them talked for a while, Dan Yi's expression changed. He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Fu, you're here." He apologized and left the clear sky palace, welcoming Fu Qingming in. Zhang Yan was also in front of the palace gate. The three of them greeted each other outside, then went inside and sat down. Danny said, "Just now, we were just talking about fellow Taoist Fu. I didn't expect you to come here so soon. Did everything go well?" Fu Qingming said, "I'm here for this matter. I need to discuss it with you fellow Taoists." Danny said, "Please speak, fellow Taoist." Fu Qingming paused for a while and said, "Should we invite fellow Taoist E as well?" Danny smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist E has been deducing supernatural powers and refining magic treasures in seclusion these few days. His clone is also recruiting disciples everywhere. He said that he has no time to deal with anything. Since that's the case, we shouldn't disturb him." Michihito Ichido understood that he wasn't a human cultivator after all, so he took the initiative to avoid these things. Moreover, he liked to avoid the world. Now that the world had been established, as long as there wasn't anything that required the four of them to work together, he didn't want to interfere. When Fu Qingming heard this, he didn't ask anymore and only said, "These days, Fu Qingming has been investigating the world. There might have been a lot of external gods, but after 1,000,000 years of chaos and the deliberate suppression of demons, there are less than 1,000 of them left. Although I've ordered them to go to different places in the world, there are still too few of them. It's not enough to protect the people of the Tao on the continent. 1,000 seem to be a lot, but it should be known that the Kanshi continent could be said to be boundless. If all these external gods were scattered, the role they could play would be extremely limited. At most, they could only protect a part of it." Danny couldn't help but nod. With regards to this situation, they had already considered it, so he said, "Then according to the original agreement, we'll use great magic power to capture the lost chi dynamic in the void. We'll work together to create a group of external gods. This matter should be faster. Just now, fellow Taoist Zhang has discovered that the heavenly demon has also sent people to secretly enter our Busha heaven. In the future, not only will we have to face demons, but we will also have to face these foreign beings." When Fu Qingming heard this, he was surprised. After asking about it, he also frowned. However, now he could only do his own thing. He said in a deep voice, "Then this matter is settled. However, there's still a key point here. I feel that I still need to discuss it with fellow Taoists." Danny said, "Fellow Taoist, please speak clearly." Fu Qingming said, "It's not difficult to create these external gods, but in the next thousands of years, the main people who will deal with the people of the human Tao will be this generation. Therefore, I think that we need to set a name for them, so that their actions in the future can be justified. Not only will it be convenient for me to control them, but it will also not cause chaos to the people below." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Fellow Taoist Fu's suggestion is very reasonable. Now that the demons and devils have entered the human Tao, let's not talk about the demons and devils. According to the agreement, they can only stay far away from the boundaries of our human Tao. As for the extraterrestrial devils, after obtaining the form to stay in the world, they are even better at transformation. If they mix into the external gods, it will be a great disaster. I think that we should set up a name for them. Not only will they be restrained, but they can also be traced back to their original source. If there are any unusual movements, we can use this to investigate and immediately find out the reason." Danny thought for a while and said seriously, "If we do this, the object that carries it is the key, so we have to be careful. It's best to refine it into a treasure, and the four of us can then plant chi on it. Only then can we ensure that it is safe. Otherwise, if it accidentally falls into the hands of the demons and devils, it may be used by them instead." Fu Qingming said, "It's best to refine this object with heavenly materials and earthly treasures, but I'm afraid it's too late now." Danny said, "No problem, I have a plan." He stretched out his hand and took out the innate golden lotus. "I can temporarily entrust this object to my mind. This innate golden lotus is compatible with my mind, so I'm not afraid of others taking it away." Fu Qingming nodded and said, "This is also a way." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Let's do this first. Fellow Taoist can hold the root of this, and in the future, when we find treasures, we can build a pillar and let the people below control it." After the three of them came to an agreement, they each used their mana to capture the chi dynamics of the past that were wandering in the void. This was to sort them out so that when they developed intelligence, there would be no one to guide them to harm the world. Secondly, it could also prevent the demons and devils from using them. In just a few days, the three of them had collected more than 100,000 chi dynamics. With a little mana, they could make these chi dynamics appear in the world. However, to scatter them across the entire Kunsher continent, it was actually still a drop in the ocean, but if it was used to deal with the current situation, it was enough. Danny said, "Next, it's just a little bit more refining, so I'll continue. Fellow Taoists, you two can go back first. If there are any changes, I'll find you two to discuss it." Zhang Yan also knew that there was no need for them to interfere, so he bid farewell to Fu Qingming and left. After saying goodbye to the latter in front of the palace gate, they left the Qiongshao Palace and landed in the Kuan residence. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.